Chapter 393. The endgame was also a deadlock. Any chess game would end in a deadlock. The turbulent situation on the chessboard seemed to be clear at the end, but there were endless variables hidden in the remaining chess pieces, subtle and obscure. Therefore, whether the chess game was fierce or peaceful, whether the chess style was fierce or patient, when it reached the endgame stage, it was the situation created by the chess players. No matter how such a situation looked to outsiders, only the chess players would know what all this meant. There were not many chess pieces on the chessboard. Most of the chariots, horses, and cannons were killed. The fortune teller of the red chess pieces was disabled. The two soldiers of the black chess pieces were still guarding. The red chess pieces still had the horse cannon. At this point in the game, it could be said to be the most fierce trump card. But the pawns of the black chess pieces crossed the boundary between Chu and Han, and their every move carried a strong sense of oppression. Bai Zhanfang sat down on the sofa and watched the game without saying a word. At this point in the endgame, the chess pieces represented no longer played a big role. The control of the game was the key to victory or defeat. The two old chess players were very patient. They thought for a long time, carefully placed the chess pieces, and maintained their composure step by step. No matter how bad the situation was, all they wanted was victory. Those chess pieces that were thrown out of the chessboard before victory, no matter how important they were not important to the victory or defeat since they had been eliminated. Bai Zhanfang watched silently. Time passed slowly. The old men at both ends of the chessboard moved more and more slowly. There were fewer and fewer chess pieces on the chessboard, and the large blank area revealed only solemnity. Draw. Bai Zhanfang, who had been watching the game, finally spoke. He didn't know the mind of the chess players, but he saw the result of the game clearly. For the disadvantaged side, a draw is victory. The old man holding the red chess pieces chuckled. The old man's hair and beard were all white, and even his face looked abnormally pale. His face was old, his eyes were dim, and he was dressed in plain cloth clothes, looking extremely haggard. But his voice and temperament were unusually calm. It was the steadiness and calmness that had been settled for many years. His every move was shining with the light of wisdom. A draw is a draw. I'm a soldier. For me, if I can't destroy everything, it's a failure. It's the same on the chessboard and outside the chessboard. A draw is equivalent to coexistence. If they are enemies, how can they coexist? It's best to kill them all. The old man holding the black chess pieces was dressed in a tang suit and had a ruddy face. Among the three of them, he was not the youngest, but he looked the most energetic and fierce. Even though he was over 70 years old, his words were still full of determination. You're just too murderous. When an ordinary person is at a disadvantage, the first thing they think about is how to survive. Once you're at a disadvantage, the first thing you think about is how to perish together with your opponent. This is the style of your family, good or bad. If you had calmed down during that game, I wouldn't have had much of a chance of winning. However, you were decisive in killing, willing to sacrifice your troops to kill to the end. That's why I forced you into a draw. The chess game is so harmless, but if it was outside the chessboard, how tragic would it be for the two families to fight to such an extent? The haggard old man sighed softly and looked at the opponent in front of him in silence. He smiled again and said, however, there are benefits to having a strong killing intent. If it weren't for this temperament, you wouldn't have been able to cultivate the god of massacre of Zhongzhou state today. However, in many matters, it was best to be more tactful. It's too unyielding. It's easy to be forced into a draw with a pawn, or even turn defeat into victory. I can't help it. Your pawn is extraordinary. The old man in the tang suit laughed and said in a knowing tone. My pawn has now crossed the river, and will become your pawn. I hope he can be more radical under your influence, but it's best if he can be tactful at the critical moment. The old man said this quietly, and his face became more and more haggard. The old man in the tang suit held the chess piece and said nothing. Li Honghe, Dongcheng Hongguang, a former war god of Zhongzhou state, a former minister of the army headquarters of Zhongzhou state. Without anyone noticing, the two had secretly appeared in Yuzhou and the Bai family manor before the high-level meeting began. Another game? Dongcheng Hongguang raised his head and glanced at Li Honghe with burning eyes. Li Honghe said a lot. Dongcheng Hongguang also listened to a lot of it. However, for him, it was still a little aggrieved to play a draw when he had the upper hand. Well, another game is the same. It's been more than 20 years. How many times have you won? Bai Zhanfang said angrily, not giving face to his in-law at all. He added water to the teapot and changed the tea leaves. The fragrance of tea began to drift in the living room again. I've only gone down a few times. Dongcheng Hongguang looked dissatisfied. One game a year. Tianlan is 22 years old this year. How many games have you played? Which one have you won? Bai Zhanfang was not polite at all. I haven't lost either. Dongcheng Hongguang seemed to be a little angry. Li Honghe smiled and waved his hand. Hongguang and I have our own strengths. I'm not as good as him in some aspects, and he is not as good as me in some aspects. That's why I chose to neutralize each other. He was telling the truth. His heart was sincere. From the year when the Li family collapsed to the present, for 22 years, Li Honghe would come here every year to play a game of chess with Dongcheng Hongguang. 22 years. 22 games were draws. They were all draws. Li Honghe looked down at the chessboard, his eyes a little absent-minded. He used to be the god of war of Zhongzhou state. But even in his most glorious period, he had never been too aggressive. He had been mediocre all his life. In the face of anything, his first reaction was not to seek victory, but to seek peace. Such a god of war of Zhongzhou state had naturally been brilliant, but there were not many records that could be remembered. He was seeking peace, so there were few big victories. But Zhongzhou state had never been defeated in the years when he was the state-protecting god of war. At that time, Li Honghe was very stable. Zhongzhou state was also very stable, terrifyingly stable. So until now, Li Honghe couldn't understand why he had cultivated such an aggressive son after being mediocre all his life. Stable, mediocre, and seeking peace. That was the secret of Li Honghe's success. No one would doubt the secret of his success, at least until he failed. So even if he discovered the undercurrent between the Li family and the Wang family of Beihai, Li Honghe was still confident in his control. He still tried to play a game of chess between the Wang family of Beihai and the Li family. But no one gave him this opportunity. Li Guangtu didn't give it, nor did Summer Solstice. When he was still making arrangements, the whole situation had collapsed in an instant. The flood was overwhelming, and the situation was beyond redemption. The mediocre and the draw he sought seemed so hesitant in hindsight. It was at that time that he finally began to reflect on whether there was something wrong with his way of dealing with it. Looking at the whole world, he was definitely the person who was the best at playing chess. When he was at a disadvantage, he could force a draw, which Dongcheng Hongguang couldn't do. When he had an advantage, Dongcheng Hongguang could sweep everything away and play to his heart's content. Li Honghe asked himself that he couldn't do that. With an advantage, if he played chess, he was afraid that it would still be a draw, or even a loss. The collapse of the Li family was the result of his seeking peace when he had an advantage. It was also because he realized his own shortcomings that the Li family had today's subtle relationship with the Dongqing clan, the Bai family, and even the Zhou family later. Li Honghe silently put away the chessboard. He looked at Bai Zhanfang, who was making tea but seemed a little preoccupied, and said with a smile, "Was the meeting very lively?" "More than lively." Bai Zhanfang shook his head and didn't say much. Both Dongcheng Hongguang and Li Honghe could get the details of the high-level meeting as soon as possible. Dongcheng Hongguang didn't need to say much. As for Li Honghe, although the Li family collapsed because of Li Guangtu, no one dared to deny Li Honghe's own achievements. Just like the last Yuzhou conference, Li Huaqing personally supported Li Honghe when he attended. Sometimes, in terms of status, Li Honghe was still a retired top giant. Therefore, for more than 20 years, the staff would sort out the contents of every high-level meeting for him to read. But Li Honghe had never expressed any opinions. Tianzong is a little anxious. Li Honghe said quietly. If he can be more patient, maybe there will be other results. He was silent for a while, and then he laughed at himself. Let him be. The Snowdance core is good. It's very suitable for the current Tianlan. The simple Snowdance core is really good. Bai Zhanfang looked at Li Honghe. But what about Wang Tianzong and Gu Xingyun? Let them be. Li Honghe's tone was still calm. I'll stay in Yuzhou for a few more days and visit some old friends. Bai Zhanfang and Li Honghe looked at each other. Li Honghe's old friends were basically big shots as long as they were still alive. And they were the retired big shots of the Southeast group. Brother, are you going to play a game with the juniors of the Wang family of Beihai in person? Dongcheng Hanguang hesitated and asked. It's not my turn. Li Honghe chuckled. I'll make some preparations. But in this Eastern European chaos, the little girl surnamed Qin in Snow Country is the protagonist. Foolproof. Bai Zhanfang's eyes narrowed and he asked. How can I be absolutely sure? Li Honghe shook his head. Most likely. Dongcheng Hanguang and Bai Zhanfang's bodies relaxed at the same time. Anyway, we sought change at the cost of the Li family. The plan has reached the end stage, and we have no way back. If you can help us get through this difficulty, the Dongcheng family can't repay such a great favor. Dongcheng Hanguang was silent for a long time before he spoke in a low voice. Li Honghe shook his head, looked out of the window and whispered. Helping you is also helping my Li family. The Holy Land of Europe was extremely small, but to some extent, the Holy Land was one of the most terrifying countries in the world. Because there was faith here. And faith had no borders. Faith. This was a word that represented too many special meanings. It was sacred, a destination, a worship, and inviolable. At the same time, it also meant absolute madness. This was a country built in Ciccio City, the capital of Italy. It was a country within a country and a holy land in the eyes of nearly 2 billion believers in the world. It was the first time for Qin Weibai to come to the Holy Land. She was not invited, nor was she an uninvited guest. It was more like a natural cooperation between the two sides under certain conditions. There was a holy palace in the Holy Land. Living in the Holy Palace was the master of the Holy Land, and the spokesperson of God in the hearts of more than 1 billion believers. The bright sun shone in front of the Holy Palace. The ancient Holy Palace seemed to be gilded in the sun, mysterious and majestic, with a sense of solemnity precipitated by history and time. Qin Weibai stood quietly in front of the Holy Palace. The sun fell on her and fell in the Holy Palace. She and the Holy Palace both shone. In this state, Qin Weibai was like a statue of a goddess standing in front of the Holy Palace. It was beautiful, flawless, and inviolable. But it was a little empty. Lin Fengting stood beside Qin Weibai and looked at the solemn palace in front of him. His eyes were a little playful. It's my first time here, Qin Weibai said softly. Her eyes were a little dazed, as if she was holding back, but there was a kind of clear sorrow that could go deep into the bone. I have no wine. Lin Fengting joked. Do you have a story? No. Qin Weibai shook her head with a smile and said in a quiet tone. I just remember that a long time ago, there was a man who promised his woman that he would let the owner of this holy palace personally preside over their wedding in the church opposite. Lin Fengting's eyes were quiet and gentle. That can be regarded as the highest standard of grand wedding in any era. I thought so when I was young, but I didn't do it. He didn't do it, did he? Lin Fengting smiled softly. He did, Qin Weibai said. Qin Weibai said, her eyes a little cold. But that woman gave up herself. Lin Fengting froze for a moment. Qin Weibai didn't say much. She took a deep breath and raised her hand to tidy the hair in front of her forehead. Her movements were slow, but her whole temperament was constantly changing as she raised her hand. The emptiness gradually disappeared. The sadness disappeared. The trance faded. The wind blew in the sunshine in front of the holy palace. The wind blew her long hair and made it fly. It seemed to be in the blink of an eye. Qin Weibai's temperament became extremely cold and sacred. That was a kind of lofty arrogance. Or arrogance. Arrogance was a sin. In front of this holy palace, which should be the most humble, Qin Weibai only had arrogance. She walked slowly into the holy palace. The clear sound of high-heeled shoes tapped on the ground of the holy palace. It was very arrogant and enchanting. A holy palace guard with a mask came over. He seemed to know why Qin Weibai and others came. He saluted and then led the way in front of them silently. In the study of the holy palace, which precipitated infinite knowledge and wisdom, an old man in a moon-white robe stood quietly in front of the door. He looked at Qin Weibai and Lin Fengting, who were led by the guard with a subtle and gentle smile. The old man's appearance was not handsome, but his face was extremely warm. He was not tall, dressed in a white robe, had silver hair, and was neat and clean. A black cross hung in front of his chest. Contrasting with his white robe, it was a striking sight to behold. He held a heavy book in his hand and stood in front of the door, but it seemed to be standing on the horizon. It was an indescribable sense of distance. He was also an indescribable old man. Qin Weibai walked up to the old man and looked up into his eyes. Real arrogance was never exaggerated, but a kind of silence and indifference in the face of the sacred, the supreme, and the glory. The old man was still smiling. His eyes were as deep as the sea, wise and deep, elegant, kind, gentle, and wise. Like a god. Please come in. The old man waved his hand to signal the guard to leave, and looked at Qin Weibai with a smile. Qin Weibai walked forward in silence and walked into the study, which was equal to glory and wisdom. The study was simple and plain, like the holy palace, only ancient and dignified. You amaze me. I'm amazed by your beauty, your intelligence, and your decisiveness. But you also make me angry because of your arrogance. The old man still held the book and stood in front of Qin Weibai, speaking softly. His voice was gentle and quiet, but it was extremely powerful. It was not force, but a kind of indescribable heaviness and oppression, as if his words could determine everyone's fate. I don't like it here, Qin Weibai said. Her Latin was smooth and cold. She sat down in front of the old man with an indifferent expression. The old man in the white robe was not angry, but asked softly, "You have no faith?" "Yes." Qin Weibai nodded. "I only believe in my man." The old man looked at Qin Weibai quietly, and was silent for a long time. Qin Weibai looked at the old man, and her eyes were extremely aggressive. She sat. He stood. So Qin Weibai had to look up to him. But at this moment, she was like a queen who ruled the world. Awe-inspiring and noble. Still arrogant. The old man said calmly. Qin Weibai did not speak, but quietly reached out her hand. She came here to see what she wanted to see. If the old man gave it to her, this cooperation would be a pleasant one. The old man did not hesitate. He just handed the heavy book in his hand to Qin Weibai and whispered, "The Lord is merciful. You should thank the Lord." Qin Weibai did not speak and took the book from the old man's hand. The book was extremely thick, and the cover was strange black. This was a famous book in the dark world. For hundreds of years, the content had been changing, but the cover had never changed. This was the famous heretic list in the Holy Palace. It recorded everyone who was most likely to cause great chaos in each era. To put it bluntly, it was every master. Qin Weibai opened the book and calmly said, "I'm here because of the chaos in Eastern Europe." "The Lord gave you the list because of the chaos in Eastern Europe." The old man smiled and remained calm, but his eyes were shining with wisdom. Qin Weibai raised her head and glanced at him. She turned over the names on the first page of the list. His list was on the second page. There was a letter in the first place on the second page, and there were Chinese characters. Zhongzhou Sword Emperor, Wang Tianzong. Under this name, there was all the information about Wang Tianzong that could be collected by the outside world. Qin Weibai looked down at the information. The old man looked down at Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai reached out her hand. Her fingers were slender and delicate. She was as beautiful as jade and seemed to shine with jade light. Her fingers gently lifted, but she did not turn the page. Instead, she calmly but quickly tore the whole page off. The page fluttered in the air and fell into the old man's hand. "Guilty," Qin Weibai said. Her cold voice sounded in the study, but it seemed to shake the whole dark world. The old man caught the page and smiled calmly. "You should be judged." Qin Weibai continued to turn the page. One of the pages had been torn out. There was also a name on the page, but there was little information. Li Shi, the young madam of the Li family, the wife of the governor of Kunlun City. "Guilty," Qin Weibai said. The old man caught the page again and said with a smile, "You should be judged." The page continued to turn. Irene Qingtong Wang Rothschild, Grand Duke. The page was torn off. "Guilty. You should be judged." the patriarch of the Jiang family of South America, Jiang Qiansong. Guilty. You should be judged. The page continued to turn. The page in the old man's hand was getting thicker and thicker. Every page should be judged. Once again, Qin Weibai tore off another page. The head of Knights Templars Chaos. Guilty. The old man caught the page, glanced at it calmly, and said with a smile, "The Lord will take back the glory given to him. He should be judged." Qin Weibai raised her head and looked at the old man. "Where are the Lord's swords and knights?" she asked straightforwardly. The trial was not a sermon. It was redemption and purification. But in the end the trial was a trial. It needed swords. It needed knights and strength. The old man looked at Qin Weibai's eyes and said calmly, "I will crown Arceus." Qin Weibai looked at the old man. After a long time she nodded. She, who had been arrogant, bowed slightly, and her noble head seemed to be lower. "Thank you, Your Majesty." "Your Majesty." There were two majesties who were known all over the world. His Majesty Sword Emperor of Beihai Province in Zhongzhou State. And the other one. It was His Majesty the Pope in the Holy Land. The Holy Land was the headquarters of the Vatican. The old man picked up a scepter, put it on the top of Qin Weibai's head, and said with a smile, "The Lord appreciates the humble." Qin Weibai lowered her head. Her eyes were cold as she looked at the ground. She was never humble. She would only temporarily lower her head when she needed to do so. She needed the power of the Vatican, just as he needed the Lin clan, the Dark Knights and all the power. Her goal had never been simply to stare at Wang Tianzong. What she stared at was the whole dark world. In the chaos of Eastern Europe, she would also judge the whole dark world. The world was guilty. They should all be judged. The Pope put away the scepter. Qin Weibai stood up and left the study in silence. The old man stared down at the page in his hand, his eyes deep. A tall guard walked into the study. "I can't accept her arrogance." The guard's eyes were angry. "Blasphemy. She put herself in a higher position than you, which is blasphemy. I refuse to cooperate with the heresy. I promised her that I would crown you." The Pope looked at the page in his hand and pointed to the door with the scepter. "Get out." The guard's face changed. He suppressed his anger and walked out of the study. He could refuse the Pope occasionally, but he could not refuse the scepter in the Pope's hand. That represented a higher power than the Pope. The Pope carefully put down the page in his hand and picked up the heretic roster. The roster was thick. So Qin Weibai did not turn to the end. The Pope turned to the second last page of the roster in silence. The information on that page was equally simple. Qin Weibai, the will of the Samsara Palace. The Pope narrowed his eyes, reached out, and gently tore the page off. He put it in the stack of pages that needed to be judged. His eyes relaxed slightly, and he chuckled. Guilty, they should be judged. Chapter 394. It rained in Yuzhou. It also rained in Shenzhou. The falling rain continued to spread over Shenzhou city, sprinkling all over the city and covering Mount Dibing. The emperor weapon cleaned up the dust in the mountain. The holy mountain in the rain was extremely green and bright. Wang Yuetong stood in front of the window and looked out. Her palace was very high. Standing in front of the window, she could see the vast palaces on Mount Dibing. Flowers, green trees, and grass dotted the palaces. From her point of view, most of the flowers and trees on Mount Dibing were swaying in the wind and rain. The palace, which was as stable as a rock, was located here. Everything was extremely clear and layered. Wang Yuetong looked at the falling rain from the sky. It turned out that when a person stood on a high place, even the falling rain had a different style. Wang Yuetong looked at it for a long time. She suddenly felt that everything was so strange. Strange Mount Dibing, strange herself. This feeling was not joy or disgust, but pure strangeness, as if there was no place to live. The rain was falling quietly. Several statue-like figures stood in the rain under the palace, motionless. This was the 5th day of Wang Yuetong's house arrest. Her mobile phone was confiscated, the internet was cut off, and she lost all contact with the outside world. There was a small group of Heaven Punishment troop guarding around the palace. In fact, Wang Yuetong had no chance to leave when any one of the Heaven Punishment troop, whose average strength was at the peak of the fire-flaming realm, stood downstairs, not to mention a small group. Wang Tianzong put a small group here, which was enough to show his resolute attitude. August 1st. It was the second day of the final maneuver. Wang Yuetong stared at the statue-like figures downstairs, in an environment where she could not maintain any contact with the outside world. Wang Yuetong did not even know the result of the maneuver. She only knew what her father said when he imprisoned her at that time. When the final maneuver was over, if Li Tianlan did not die, he would let her go. It was already afternoon. It was close to evening again. Wang Yuetong did not move. The watery and bright brilliance in her eyes gradually dimmed as time went by. Eventually, it became cold and desperate. A slender figure holding an umbrella passed through the rain curtain, and finally came to Wang Yuetong's palace. His face was pale, and his whole body showed a kind of exhaustion and weakness that could not be concealed. But in a seriously injured state he could still stand. Wang Yuetong's dim eyes were complicated. There was joy, and there was sorrow. It was extremely contradictory, but in the end, it all turned into emptiness and coldness. The chill of midsummer seemed to have engulfed the entire world. Her body trembled slightly. Wang Shengxiao was standing downstairs. Her brother was badly injured. Was her man still alive? Wang Yuetong did not dare to think about it. Her heart seemed to be completely empty, leaving only numbness and silence. The siblings looked at each other through the curtain of rain. The continuous rain beat on the vermilion window lattices of the palace. Wang Yuetong stood in front of the window, her figure extremely clear. Her aura kept surging around her body, and the coldness in front of the palace kept increasing. The rain that fell on the ground gradually froze, and frost slowly appeared in the grass and flowers. Wang Yuetong was still in the ice-condensing realm. Her martial arts kept fluctuating. She stood there silently, unconscious and lifeless. Wang Shengxiao suddenly thought of a lyric. The rain gently bounced, the vermilion window. Who was it in the attic? Cold despair. The corners of his mouth curled up into a self-deprecating smile. The heaven punishment troop under the palace saw Wang Shengxiao for the first time, and everyone bowed at the same time. Wang Shengxiao waved his hand and said softly, "Your task is done. Go back, I'll talk to Yuetong." A small group of heaven punishment troop left with different expressions. Wang Shengxiao slowly walked into the palace and went upstairs. In the small hall on the second floor, Wang Yuetong's figure was still with her back to him, motionless. Wang Shengxiao lifted the delicate food box in his hand and said softly, "I brought you your favorite soup dumplings. Won't you try them?" Wang Yuetong did not speak or move. "Father is back. The heaven punishment troop has completed its task. From today on you are free." Wang Shengxiao continued. Wang Yuetong looked back, and there was only a blank look in her eyes. Wang Shengxiao put the food box on the table with a bitter smile. He was silent for a long time before he continued, "I lost. Guhanshan, Jiang Shangyu and Song Ci. Jiang Shangyu plus Song Ci, the four of us, together with hundreds of elites, lost without any face. Li Tianlan broke our strongest blow with only one sword move." Wang Shengxiao quietly talked about his failure. His eyes were also dim, but there was a glimmer of extreme persistence in them. Wang Yuetong's eyes also lit up. "How are your injuries?" She was silent for a while, then looked at Wang Shengxiao and asked softly. "Not bad." Wang Shengxiao said calmly. "It's just that my realm regressed a little bit. It's just a matter of time. If I have time, I can always catch up again." Before the maneuver began, he was really at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, but he was seriously injured because he forced himself to practice the half-samsara of the Wang family of Beihai. At the beginning of the maneuver, his realm was already unstable. Li Tianlan's strength made him completely determined. The strike of lowering his realm was not from the peak of the thunder-shocking realm to the stabilization phase of the thunder-shocking realm, but directly to the peak of the fire-flaming realm. He paid such a huge price, but he still lost to Li Tianlan. This maneuver was really tragic for Wang Shengxiao. "Where is Tianlan?" Wang Yuetong's voice was low. Wang Shengxiao looked over. Wang Yuetong turned her head. She also knew that it was not appropriate to ask Wang Shengxiao this question. But she, who had lost all contact with the outside world, really wanted to know how Li Tianlan was. Li Tianlan is fine. At most he is slightly injured, Wang Shengxiao said calmly. After the maneuver, he rose to the top. At the high-level meeting that just ended, the high-level decided to restart the Snowdance Corps of Zhongzhou State. Li Tianlan is the second marshal of the Special Warfare System after Gu Qianchuan. Brother Jiang took over the part-time job of Minister Dongcheng and became the commander of the Border Control Corps. The light in Wang Yuetong's eyes gradually lit up. He is still alive, Wang Yuetong said. She didn't care about Li Tianlan's current status. The commander of the Snowdance Corps and the marshal of Special Warfare were just a very vague concept in her mind. It might not be low, but she didn't think it was high either. Since she was a child, the elders who appeared around her were all in high positions. It was just a position, so it was really hard to shock Wang Yuetong. What she cared about was that Li Tianlan won the maneuver, and that her father didn't attack him. He was still alive. Alive. Wang Shengxiao nodded. So can I leave now? Wang Yuetong asked. Yes. Wang Shengxiao sighed softly. He hesitated for a moment and took out 2 bank cards from his pocket. My father asked me to give you the black card. The gold card is mine. If you insist on leaving, take the card with you. Li Tianlan is destined to be the enemy of the Wang family of Beihai in the future. You are born in the Wang family of Beihai, so your life may not be easy. If you can be independent financially, you won't have to suffer too much in the future. Wang Yuetong looked at the 2 cards on the table. The gold card was the brother's doting on his sister, and the black card was undoubtedly the father's explanation to his daughter. Wang Yuetong suddenly laughed softly. She took out another card from her pocket and put it on the table. Wang Shengxiao frowned. He is my man. He should support me. Wang Yuetong said calmly. I will take the money of the Wang family of Beihai down the mountain and give it to Tianlan. If he doesn't feel comfortable accepting it, you won't feel comfortable either. In this case, it's better not to take it. The Wang family of Beihai and the East Emperor Palace should have a clear boundary in the future. It's better not to have so many entanglements. A clear boundary? Wang Shengxiao suddenly raised his eyebrows. Yuetong, you can't wait to draw a clear boundary with your family? This is not drawing a clear boundary. Wang Yuetong said softly. This is just my choice. Brother, our family is too big. I didn't think much before, but recently I suddenly found that in this family, everyone has a role, but I can't find my own position. I shouldn't continue to be willful. I won't come back until I have a position on this mountain. What position do you want? Wang Shengxiao said coldly. The hostess of the East Emperor Palace, the daughter of the Wang family of Beihai, and a friend of the Wang family of Beihai. Wang Yuetong looked at Wang Shengxiao and said softly and firmly, this is the most suitable position for me. Wang Shengxiao looked up at his sister. How is it possible? After a long time he asked back. Nothing is impossible. Wang Yuetong smiled faintly. Brother, what's your plan? Wang Shengxiao was a little stunned. 1 second ago he was worried about his sister's future, and the next second, she was already worried about his future. Plan, he hesitated, shook his head and said calmly, I won't leave Beihai for the time being. I will recuperate here. After I recover, I will practice martial arts in seclusion. Wang Yuetong was silent. After a long time she said softly, then I'm leaving. Walk around with me. Wang Shengxiao sighed softly. He walked to the window and looked out. His eyes were full of affection. Let's look at Mount Dibing. For a long time in his life, he was destined to have only martial arts. For a long time in her life, she was destined to have only that man. He would be silent. She would travel far. She would leave. As a member of the Wang family of Beihai, how could she not take a look at the magnificent mountains and rivers between the sky and the sea before leaving? Wang Tianzong didn't see his daughter again. Since he couldn't keep her, it didn't make sense to see her. He walked quietly on the path of Mount Dibing, aimlessly, as if he was meditating. After the conferring ceremony in Yuzhou, Dijong was already in a military uniform. The martial rank was shining majestic. He followed Wang Tianzong quietly, wanting to say something but stopping on second thought. What do you want to say? Wang Tianzong suddenly asked. I'm a little confused. I hope Master can give me some advice. How should we deal with the Border Control Corps? Di Jiang chuckled and said calmly. The Black Dragon Battalion won't be a big problem. Qianzhong should be able to open up the situation quickly. Dongqing Wudi will soon hand over the Thunderbolt Battalion. This is a troop directly under your command. Fill it with people from the Beihai Corps. The Wild Sand Battalion and the Pegasus Battalion can be put aside first. At present, the most important thing is the Blood Battalion. They are close to Tiannan and their position is very sensitive. If we can control the Blood Battalion, it will be very beneficial for us to open up the situation in Tiannan. Tiannan is indeed very important. The Dongqing clan has also realized this. Some time ago, Wang Wantian was transferred to the Eastern Theater of Operations, and Dongqing Wudi put Thunder God in the Blood Battalion. They are obviously unwilling to give up the right to speak in the Blood Battalion. Di Jiang said subconsciously. Wang Tianzong's body suddenly stood still. What did you say? He asked suddenly. Di Jiang was a little confused. I said the Dongqing clan will not easily give up the Blood Battalion. That was not what Wang Tianzong wanted to hear. But all the veins in his mind suddenly became extremely clear. The Dongqing clan, Li Tianlan, the Li family, Ning Ziyuan, the Tiannan Freedom Corps, the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. Everything that had been in front of him had now become a line in front of him without warning. Wang Tianzong narrowed his eyes tightly, and a flash of sharpness suddenly flashed in his eyes. He finally knew what he had ignored. After figuring out the situation in Tiannan, everything was clear. But the result of the joint operation of all the major forces had shrouded everything there in a layer of fog. The most important thing was that Wang Tianzong had underestimated how much the Dongqing clan cared about Li Tianlan. When the Dongqing clan was willing to stand in front of Li Tianlan to shelter him from the wind and rain, he should have realized what Tiannan meant to Li Tianlan. During this time, his eyes were all focused on the Border Control Corps, the chaos in Eastern Europe, and the Li family. Intentionally or unintentionally, he ignored the situation in Tiannan formed by the operation of multiple forces. The Blood Battalion, the Freedom Corps, the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, even the Southwest Special Warfare Headquarters dominated by Mount Shu. Now it seemed to have no connection. But if Li Tianlan was added to all this, it vaguely formed a whole. The Blood Battalion was operated by the Giant Group. The Southwest Special Warfare Headquarters was the work of the Prince Group. And the Freedom Corps, Ning Ziyuan's transfer was an internal transfer of the Wang family of Beihai. Such an obvious situation was in front of them, but Wang Tianzong had never paid attention to it. How ridiculous was that? Li Tianlan now won the first place in the maneuver. If the East Emperor Palace entered Tiannan as a free force, the chain reaction would be earth-shaking. Tiannan seemed to have no connection, but it was an extremely delicate situation. Li Tianlan was one step away. What the Dongqing clan did not want to give up was not the Blood Battalion. They obviously did not want to give up Tiannan. Wang Tianzong was silent for a long time. Let Chen Qingwan enter the Snowdance Corps as the vice-marshal, Wang Tianzong suddenly said. Chen Qingwan? Di Jiang frowned. Chen Qingwan was one of the few female experts in the Wang family of Beihai, and one of the vice-marshals of the Beihai Corps. But the most important thing was that Chen Qingwan had always been Wang Qinglei's direct subordinate in the faction of the Wang family of Beihai. Why her? Di Jiang asked. Wang Tianzong remembered the situation when Wang Qinglei recommended Ning Ziyuan to be the commander of the Tiannan Freedom Corps. It was indeed the best choice to send Ning Ziyuan to Tiannan and kick him out of the core of the Southeast Group. Even now it seemed that there was no problem. But the problem was obvious. Wang Tianzong was not sure whether Wang Qinglei had other purposes at the beginning. Send an assistant to Chen Qingwan. Wang Tianzong said. You appoint the assistant. Di Jiang nodded, but he was still a little confused. Why her? Why can't it be her? Wang Tianzong asked in a calm tone. Di Jiang hesitated and seemed to be thinking about something. Wang Tianzong reached out his hand. A glittering and translucent light gradually appeared on his palm. The light flowed and extended in his cuff silently. The soft light accurately covered his palm and finally turned into a glove. It was a glove with crystal clear and almost transparent color. Wang Tianzong took off the glove and handed it to Dijiang. Just in case, you go to the Blood Battalion to inspect during this time. Li Tianlan could not go to Tiannan now. Everything in Tiannan had not been completely finalized. If there was a chance, it might be possible to break the current situation. Dijiang took the glove and was in a daze. He knew very well what this glove was. It was borrowed by Wang Tianzong from the Shadow Throne in Europe. He arrived at Mount Dibbing in the middle of the night last night. And Wang Tianzong's original intention was not to give it to him, but to borrow it for Tyrant. Tyrant, Dijiang hesitated. I can't find Tyrant now, Wang Tianzong said. Before that, you take it with you to suppress Tiannan. Dijiang held the glove and suddenly felt that the thin glove was as heavy as a mountain. Who could think that this small and exquisite glove was one of the 12 murderous weapons in the Dark World, second only to the human emperor? The murderous weapon Tiannan. Among the 12 murderous weapons, everyone had a different ranking in their mind. But the top 3 of the 12 murderous weapons were recognized as the most powerful and deterrent. The human emperor ranked first. The third was Blue Sky Underworld. Between the two was the glove in Dijiang's hand. It belonged to the Shadow Throne, the murderous weapon with the fastest speed and the strongest single penetration among the 12 murderous weapons. Indefinite Shocking Rainbow. Chapter 395. Although the Holy Land was small, it was a world-famous sleepless city. Whether it was wind, frost, rain or snow, it was a pure land without darkness. When the sun faded, soft lights would replace the night immediately. The white light shone in every corner of the Holy Land. The churches and the Holy Palace in the Holy Land were more brilliant in the light. The Pope was still sitting in the study of the Holy Palace, quietly reading the heretic roster in his hand. The roster had been much thinner, but the content was still rich and colorful. The names and information recorded in the roster were not all martial arts masters of the Dark World. There were also some wealthy patriarchs and core members in their respective fields, politicians, terrorists, important figures of other religions, and even ordinary people. In the eyes of the Vatican, the size of a heretic was never distinguished by force. From the standpoint of faith, as small as a public statement, as large as a certain practice that was promoted to a certain range, it could become a heretic. Heretics must be on the heretic roster. The heretics on the roster must be purified. The Pope quietly read the roster. The light in the room fell on him. His figure was mysterious and majestic. The heretic roster had been turned to the last page. On the cover of the last page was a row of ancient quotes written in Latin. It seemed to be stating the cruelest fact. Those who betray the glory of the Lord are all heretics. The Pope stared at this sentence deeply. His eyes were pure and pious. Someone passed through the road of the Holy Palace and approached the study in the deepest part of the Holy Palace. His footsteps were silent. The door of the study was open. The lights inside and outside the study crisscrossed in front of the door. A figure stood silently at the door, looking at the Pope in the study. The light in the study seemed to be eternal. The ancient statue of God carrying a cross stood silently. The old man sat in front of the stone statue, looking down at the book in his hand, motionless. The picture in his sight was extremely real, with almost frozen solemnity and silence. The figure at the door was a little hesitant, as if she didn't know whether to go in or not. This was a mysterious woman who could bring endless reverie to anyone. She was mysterious and sacred. She was undoubtedly extremely beautiful, but this kind of beauty was not breathtaking. Instead, it was a kind of infatuation that made people want to get close to her. Her figure was tall and slender, and a loose white robe covered her figure. Her face that was enough to topple cities was covered by a hazy veil. In the crisscrossing light and shadow, only a pair of deep blue eyes and long golden hair could be seen from her entire body. However, she had a kind of intoxicating charm. This kind of charm was so mysterious and holy. This was pure beauty. One didn't need to see her face. Just a pair of eyes was enough to cause people to sink in and be unable to extricate themselves. She stood in front of the door, like the bright moon in the sky covered by the lights, bright and gentle. The Pope remained seated, his head lowered as he stared at the roster in his hands. He didn't move at all, but the sound of pages turning suddenly rang out in the study. There was only the Pope in the empty study room. But at this moment, it was as if there were countless people flipping the pages of a book. Some were fast, some were slow, some were light, and some were heavy. The sound of paper flipping was soft and messy, making people dizzy. "You found me," the woman covered in a white robe and veil from head to toe said softly. Her voice was elegant and melodious, with a very intimate and friendly quality. "You didn't find me." The light in the study room seemed to shake quietly. The study room was still the study room. The Pope was still sitting there. But another Pope suddenly appeared in front of the bookshelf in the study room. He lowered his head and gently flipped through a thick Bible in his hand. "Angel, your heart is in a mess. Can you tell me why?" The Pope lowered his head and flipped through the Bible, speaking softly. "Angel. In the Holy Land of Europe, there was only one angel. She had no surname. In the hearts of more than 1 billion believers of the Vatican, she was bathed in the glory of God, and was the child of God. The current Holy Virgin of the Vatican. Saint Angel. In the Vatican, her status could be said to be second only to the Pope, and even higher than the major cardinals." "No." Holy Virgin Angel shook her head, and her tone was a little sad. "I just thought of the chaos in Eastern Europe, so many innocent people. I am praying for the people of Eastern Europe." The light was slightly distorted. The Pope in the chair was still staring down. The Pope in front of the bookshelf was still flipping through the book. In front of the statue, another Pope suddenly appeared. He knelt in front of the statue and made the sign of the cross. His tone was distant and deep. "Where heretics and heathens gather, there will always be darkness and blood. God said that I allow darkness to exist. But darkness can never be above light." The Pope stood up. He looked at Holy Virgin Angel and said meaningfully, "Who will cherish light without experiencing darkness?" The Holy Virgin was silent. After a long time, she walked into the study room and whispered, "I will remember your teachings." In the study room, the 3 popes in different postures still maintained their movements, staring, reading, and contemplating. They were lifelike, and it was difficult to distinguish the real from the fake. "What is heresy?" The Pope pondered for a long time before suddenly asking softly. Angel was stunned and replied almost instinctively, "Those who betray the glory of the Lord are all heresy." Some people shout the name of the Lord, but choose a different direction from the Lord. They will go to hell, and their end will inevitably be according to their actions. The Pope's voice was still gentle and kind, but his figure was extremely cold in front of the statue. "They should all be judged." Angel bowed slightly and said calmly, "They should all be judged." "Go to Eastern Europe." The Pope said. "Angel, bring your holy punishment priest. Cooperate with the saint warriors of Arcis to purify the darkness there, and sprinkle the glory of the Lord in all corners of Eastern Europe. Heresy needs to be judged, and those who are false believers who have distorted the glory of the Lord should also be judged." "This is my duty," Angel said softly. The internal structure of the Vatican was simple and clear. The group of bishops, which often appeared in front of the world, was headed by red-robed archbishops. Chief bishops, diocesan bishops, archbishops, bishops, and priests were all members of the group of bishops. They were responsible for the daily operation of the Vatican, stabilizing the faith of believers, listening to the prayers of believers, and dispelling doubts. Next was the Holy Disarmament Corps, the armed forces of the Vatican. It was headed by Saint War Angel, Arcis, who ranked third on the world's divine list. Its main responsibility was to maintain the dignity and glory of the Vatican, and to judge heresy. Its main responsibility was to fight. This was an elite force selected from more than 1 billion believers in the world. They were also fanatics in the Vatican. Most of them would not be stationed in the Holy Land, but scattered all over the world. Where there was a cross, there was the Holy Disarmament Corps. Then there was the most mysterious Holy Punishment Priest Group, and the Arbitration Council. The Holy Punishment Priest Group was directly led by the Holy Maiden. It was responsible for spreading the glory of the Vatican, guiding faith, punishment, and redemption. The Arbitration Council was an intelligence and assassination agency. In the decisive Battle of Heaven Capital more than 3 years ago, After the killing Angel Aldak of the Vatican died in the hands of Li Tianlan, the arbitration council had been managed by the Holy Maiden. The Pope controlled everything in the Vatican. To put it simply, the Holy Disarmament Corps was responsible for fighting, and the Holy Punishment Priest Group was responsible for brainwashing. It was the duty of Holy Maiden Angel to spread the glory of the Lord in any corner of Eastern Europe, and it was the most important duty. "Don't let me down, Angel," the Pope said softly. "The Eastern European parishes are very important. I'm tired of the debate that has lasted for years. Those heathens don't understand the glory of the Lord at all. They have desecrated the cross. They should go to hell with the heathens of Eastern Europe." "Yes, Your Majesty." Angel's voice was soft and pleasant, but she thought of Eastern Europe in her mind. The religion of Eastern Europe was not complicated. Even in the eyes of many people who were not religious, the religion of Eastern Europe was just a branch of the Vatican. Many people who had no faith called the Vatican in the Holy Land the Catholic Church, and the religion of Eastern Europe the Eastern Church. The ruler of the Catholic Church was the Pope, the only spokesman of God in the world, and the largest religion in the world today. The ruler of the Eastern Church was the Patriarch. From the perspective of religious belief, the most important or even the only difference between Eastern Europe and Western Europe was that Eastern Europeans believed in the Eastern Church, while Western Europeans believed in the Catholic Church. This statement might not be absolute, but most of it was extremely correct. Eastern Europe was now in turmoil. More than a dozen countries were in chaos, each with its own ulterior motives. The major forces in the dark world were ready to take action. Under the gathering of the wind and clouds, the Eastern Church was bound to be in it. In that chaos, if the Eastern Church was destroyed, the Catholic Church would sweep Eastern Europe in the fastest time. Once the Eastern European diocese was established, the power of the Vatican would expand again, and they could even try to re-establish the Great East Asia Diocese they had planned to establish in East Island more than 3 years ago. The establishment of each diocese represented the expansion of the glory of the Lord, as well as infinite interests and power. Eastern Europe was chaotic, but the Vatican liked the current Eastern Europe very much, so they would be more chaotic next. There were countless unstable factors: competition for interests, entanglement of grievances, conflict of beliefs, political differences. There would be wars there, the most complicated wars. Angel didn't know how long the Pope had been watching Eastern Europe, but she was sure that the Samsara Palace was not the only superpower that chose to cooperate with the Vatican this time. Therefore, the chaos in Eastern Europe might have an unexpected result in the end. Angel's heart was a little confused, but she was smiling like a flower. She walked up to the Pope, who was sitting in the chair and staring down, and took the heretic roster from his hand. She stared down at the roster that had been turned to the end, and looked at the summary. Those who betrayed the glory of God were all heretics. But the last page of the register was not blank. There was also a name there, in both Chinese and English. In the Pope's mind, it was also a heretic, but there was little information. Angel saw a strange name that was a little hard to pronounce. Dongqing Rushi. Angel blinked and glanced at the lifelike Pope sitting in the chair. The 3 popes were doing different things. She didn't know which one was real, and which one was fake. She also didn't know what the Pope had just stared at. It was the summary at the end of the page, or Dongqing Rushi. Angel thought quietly. She was good at thinking, so she looked very focused. The light in the study flickered. Angel's shadow was printed on the wall, very slender. "I hate shadows," the Pope suddenly said, "because it's darkness. Darkness is sin." His voice was calm and sure. The look in Angel's eyes changed quietly. She raised her head and stared at the Pope. "But shadows always exist, don't they?" "Of course not." The Pope smiled. He moved his body. The light fell on him, and there was no shadow under his feet. Angel's shadow reflected on the wall also began to disappear gradually. There was only light left in the whole study. "That's much better, isn't it?" the Pope said with a smile. "This is deception." Angel looked at the Pope. Everyone knew that the Pope did not know martial arts, but few people knew that in the spiritual field, the Pope was an absolute guru. As the God in the hearts of more than 1 billion believers, the Pope could not find an opponent in the spiritual field. This meant that his will was absolutely strong, and it also meant that he was the most terrifying hypnotist in the world. He could not find an opponent at all. The Holy Palace, the Holy Church, and even the entire Holy Land could be regarded as the Pope's home field. The Pope did not want Angel to see her own shadow, so Holy Virgin Angel could not see it. Just like the three popes in front of her. As a master in the spiritual field, the Holy Virgin could not tell the truth from the falsehood. No. The Pope whispered, "This is faith. Only light is the most sacred substance. Darkness is not, and neither is shadow." But the shadow actually exists. It was rare for Angel to be persistent. It does exist. The Pope looked at Angel thoughtfully. I allow the shadow to exist in the light of the Lord, although I don't want to see it. But the shadow that the light of the Lord can't shine on is fallen, and should be purified. Angel's face suddenly turned pale. The Arbitration Council still lacks the most suitable candidate. The Pope suddenly said. Angel's delicate body trembled slightly. She lowered her head and said with unprecedented respect, "I know what to do." An ancient bell suddenly rang in the Holy Palace. The bell was mellow and deep, spreading throughout the Holy Land. The light in the Holy Land became more and more dazzling. A tall figure wearing a guard's armor walked into the study. "It's time for the coronation," the Pope said. "Angel, you should go back and prepare." "Your Majesty, I accept your coronation, but I still oppose the cooperation with heresy." The guard walked in, took off his helmet, and revealed a face that was famous in the dark world. The third place on the world divine list, the Saint War Angel of the Vatican, Saint Arcis. I allow the darkness to come close. Because we are the servants of the Lord. When the heresy is redeemed, the darkness will completely dissipate. Arcis, you have to understand that all sins are polluted and distorted glory. In the study, the three lifelike figures of the Pope began to disappear. The Pope, holding a scepter, walked down from the study on the second floor. He was dressed in a white robe, but the scepter in his hand was scarlet like blood. Arcis looked at the scarlet scepter in the Pope's hand, and there was a flash of obsession in his eyes. That was the obsession with absolute power. Be humble in front of the statue of God, the Pope said. Arcis knelt down respectfully. When he saw the scarlet scepter in the Pope's hand, he understood the content of the coronation. Coronation, God's punishment spear. There was a rumor in the dark world. There was always the bravest and most fearless warriors around the Pope. Even if there were only ordinary people around him. Such a rumor was not wrong. And the secret was the coronation. In the field of willpower and spirit, the Pope was a well-deserved absolute grandmaster. The so-called coronation was the craziest fighting will that the Pope imposed on the warriors. It was a very sober but similar to hypnosis, which could maximize a person's potential. Arcis used to be the second on the divine list, and now he was the third. And the God's punishment spear was the fiercest fighting will in all coronations. Arcis, who was crowned with the God's punishment spear, was the real Arcis, worthy of the title of the former second on the divine list. Angel watched all this quietly, but the study in her sight gradually became blurred. Angel raised her head in a daze. Only then did she realize that she was standing at the door of the study unconsciously. The sound of pages turning was still in her ears. In the study in her sight, the Pope sat in a chair, staring at the roster in his hand. A gentle and calm voice sounded. It was like a repeat of the previous one. Angel, your heart is in a mess. Can you tell me why? The light was still on. The Pope did not look up. There was no Arcis in front of the statue. Everything was so serene and calm. An indescribable coldness and fear emerged from Angel's heart, instantly occupying all her consciousness. She didn't know if she had just walked into the study. She also didn't know if what she had just seen was true. She also didn't know if what she saw now was true. She didn't know if Arcis was in the study now. But she couldn't see it. The Pope would always only let others see what he wanted others to see. Angel's heart was filled with extreme fear. She shook her head in a panic, bowed, and quickly left the study. The Pope's figure was still sitting in the chair, staring at the roster in his hand. Under the light, a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. There was no shadow in front of him. Angel walked out of the Holy Palace quickly. Her heart was beating wildly. After leaving the study in the depths of the Holy Palace, her heart did not relax, but became more and more afraid. Because the memory was dissipating. Everything in the study that she didn't know was real or fake just now began to disappear in her mind bit by bit. She didn't want to forget, but she couldn't control her thoughts. In the end, only a few words of the Pope remained in her mind. She remembered that the Pope asked her to lead the God's punishment priests to Eastern Europe to assist Arceus. As for the others, she didn't remember. She wasn't even sure if she had said something in the study that she wanted to say, but had never dared to say. She wasn't sure if the Pope knew the secret of her heart. The gate of the Holy Palace was already behind her. When the guards on the street saw the Holy Virgin, they bowed respectfully. Angel walked across the street in the most elegant manner, and entered the Holy Church opposite the Holy Palace. A thin figure in the armor of a guard stood in the darkness of the church, facing the statue of God. He did not kneel or pray, as if he was waiting. She heard footsteps. The guard turned his head and chuckled. "Beautiful Holy Virgin, you are finally here. I knew that you would definitely appear here after seeing that old fellow. This is your habit." The guard took off his helmet and revealed his face. His smile was eager, but it was extremely hypocritical. Angel was uneasy. The guard was right. Every time she saw the Pope, she would have a fear from the bottom of her heart. So she would appear here to pray as soon as possible to eliminate all the negative emotions in her heart. But at this time, she didn't expect that there would be someone waiting for her in the Holy Church. She didn't expect that the person waiting for her would be the person who shouldn't be here at this time. "Mellad." A touch of coldness gradually appeared in Angel's blue pupils. Her tone was a little low. "You should be praying now and preparing to be crowned by His Majesty the Pope." Arceus was not the only one who had the honor of being crowned. As the second commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps, Mellad was also one. He broke through to the Invincible Realm a year ago, and the news had not been made public. This time, after being crowned by the Pope, his combat capability would soar to another level. Mellad looked at Angel. His smile was still full of hypocrisy. "Are you sure what you're seeing now is true?" Mellad said with a playful smile. "Do you remember how you left the Holy Palace and where you are now?" Angel's whole body trembled violently, but then she calmed down. She remembered how she left the Holy Palace. She also remembered that she was in the Holy Church now. There was no deviation in her memory, so everything in front of her was true. "How dare you?" Angel said coldly. "You're too easily excited." Mellad said softly. "As the noblest Holy Virgin, you should be quiet and patient under any circumstances." His eyes gradually became naked and fiery, as if he wanted to tear apart Angel's clothes and veil with his eyes. "Before being crowned by His Majesty the Pope, you should pray devoutly. You've violated the will of His Majesty the Pope. This is blasphemy," Angel said coldly. "So Your Highness the Holy Virgin is going to pronounce me a heretic next?" Mellad chuckled. Angel subconsciously took a step back and said in a deep voice, "Who the hell are you?" "I'm Mellad." Mellad chuckled and said, "Now, I'm just an ordinary guard who wants to make a deal with you." "Are you qualified to make a deal with me?" Angel sneered and said, "I'm the Holy Virgin of the Vatican. If you want to go to Eastern Europe, then I'm qualified to make a deal with you." Mellad said unhurriedly, "For example, I can keep a shadow for you." Look at me, I've forgotten. Your Highness the Holy Virgin, you don't even have a surname. It's really pitiful. I think there's a surname in the ancient East that suits you better. What do you think? Situ. What do you think?" Mellad's smile was a little strange, but his eyes were extremely serious. Angel's body suddenly stiffened. She stared at the deputy commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps in front of her, and her pair of quiet blue eyes almost spewed fire at this time. "What do you want?" Angel said coldly. There was a touch of killing intent in her eyes, but her whole person was still holy and mysterious. "I want a lot," Mellad said with a smile. "First of all, I need you to accompany me to meet a distinguished guest from afar." "Why do you want me to go?" Angel forced herself to calm down. "Because your identity is noble enough," Mellad said seriously. "If you're not there, I may die, but I don't want to die. There's another chapter coming soon. Well, when you see this, it should have been updated. Chapter 396. There's still a big chapter ahead. Don't miss it. Oh, this chapter is today. End 25th. I have to go out during the day, so I can't write it. I haven't stopped updating. The only 5-star hotel in the Holy Land was not far from the Holy Palace. In the sanctuary, the closer a place was to the sacred palace, the more glorious it was. It also meant safety. Qin Weibai booked 2 luxury suites on the top floor of the hotel. Lin Fengting had his own room. Qin Weibai and Flaming Fire shared a room. They did not leave the sanctuary but waited for news from the sacred palace. Qin Weibai needed to judge the entire dark world with the help of the Vatican. The Vatican also needed to use the chosen one of the Samsara Palace to clean up the heretics. The two sides had a basis for cooperation, which was why they had today's negotiation. She would stay in the sacred region for 2 days. After ascertaining the strength of the Vatican, he would formulate his own plan according to the strength of the Vatican. Qin Weibai had a lot to think about. That was why she was not sleepy at all. Flaming Fire sat quietly opposite Qin Weibai and looked down at the brightly lit Holy Land through the window of the balcony. The sacred region was too small, and their position was extremely high, so her gaze easily passed through the almost unshadowed sanctum and landed on Seven Hills City, the capital of Italos. There were lights in Seven Hills City, but there was also darkness. Compared to the sacred region that was full of lights, the flourishing place where light and darkness mingled was the most realistic. Flaming Fire withdrew her gaze, feeling a little bored. Qin Weibai was also looking out of the window with a teacup in her hand. Her gaze was a little unfocused, and her attention was clearly not focused on the sacred region. Flaming Fire was used to her boss's state. She had been with her boss for a long time. But in most cases when there was no business, Qin Weibai was so silent. And then in silence, she came up with one huge plan after another to promote the development of Samsara Palace. In Flaming Fire's opinion, the boss who was in deep thought was undoubtedly the most charming. Even as a woman, Flaming Fire would unconsciously be intoxicated by him. The two sat on the balcony in silence. Qin Weibai's natural body fragrance wafted over. Flaming Fire sniffed quietly. A touch of happiness quietly appeared on her pretty face, which had always been cold and elegant in the past. This was the scent that made her feel at ease the most. In order to pursue this scent, she would rather fall from the human world straight to hell. Qin Weibai moved a little and took a sip of tea. "Boss, want to play chess?" Flaming Fire asked softly. Qin Weibai shook her head. All her thoughts were now immersed in the chaos of Snow Country. The Samsara Palace had the strongest sword, but it was also the weakest force. In such a situation, she needed the power that could be used, whether it came from an enemy or a friend, as long as it could be used. It was because of this that she decided to go to the sanctuary. She was in good contact with the Vatican, but she did not have enough power. After all, she was not only concerned about the Wang family of Beihai. He wanted to judge the entire dark world. Then he would have to be the enemy of the entire dark world. How much power was enough? "Look for Mr. Lin," Qin Weibai suddenly said. "If he's not asleep, I'll treat him to tea." Flaming Fire answered, stood up, walked out of the room, and knocked on the door of the suite opposite. Lin Fengting quickly opened the door and raised his eyebrows in confusion. "Boss, please have a cup of tea," Flaming Fire said expressionlessly. Lin Fengting was really good-tempered. He smiled and nodded. He followed Flaming Fire into the room and sat down opposite Qin Weibai. "Can't sleep?" he asked with a chuckle. "Isn't it the same for Mr. Lin?" Qin Weibai smiled and handed Lin Fengting a cup of tea. The tea was ordinary and tasteless. Lin Fengting wanted to smoke, but he resisted. He shook his head and said with a smile, "I'm your bodyguard this time." A bodyguard should have the consciousness of a bodyguard. People always say that the Pope doesn't know martial arts, but today I see that the old man is not simple. He's even dangerous. Now that I'm so close to him, how can I sleep well? The Pope really doesn't know martial arts. Qin Weibai said calmly. Lin Fengting raised his eyebrows, picked up the teacup and said nothing. But not knowing martial arts doesn't mean that he's not dangerous. Qin Weibai said softly. In the spiritual field he's a well-deserved god, the strongest hypnotist, and no one can match him. Hypnosis? Lin Fengting had a headache. The ancestor of the Lin clan once had an amazing hypnotist. This kind of person could not know martial arts, but sometimes he was more terrifying than any expert. That kind of unpredictable weirdness was more helpless than fighting with real knives and guns. The strongest hypnotist? Didn't that mean that even an invincible realm expert could fall into it if he was not careful? Is he a threat to people like us? Lin Fengting asked in an incredulous tone. The tenacity of the willpower at the peak of the invincible realm was completely impeccable. The spiritual field. How could their spirits be worse than others when they could reach the peak of the invincible realm in martial arts? It shouldn't be. Qin Weibai shook her head. You have to see him with your own eyes. In the face of an expert at the peak of the invincible realm, he shouldn't be able to do too much, unless you are willing or in a seriously injured and unstable state. But in the Pope's state, it's extremely difficult for an expert like you to kill him. We just saw him at noon. Lin Fengting reminded her with a stiff expression. It's fake. Qin Weibai shook her head. We didn't even go into his study at noon. The corner of Lin Fengting's mouth twitched fiercely. Isn't that the same as being fooled? Lin Fengting said helplessly. He can confuse you, but he can't threaten you. I can barely protect myself in front of him. But it's impossible for me to do anything to him. Anyway, this kind of person is not to be trifled with. He is the Pope, a deity who can be said to be the largest force in the world. How can he be ordinary? Just try not to get in touch with this kind of person in the future. Qin Weibai smiled. Lin Fengting narrowed his eyes and nodded. You called me here just to talk about the Pope? He asked. No. Qin Weibai shook her head and seemed to be a little hesitant. Lin Fengting looked at Qin Weibai quietly and waited for her to continue. The Pope can't be trusted. Qin Weibai said. The power of the Vatican can be used, but at critical moments, we still need to rely on the most trustworthy power. I don't have enough power in my hands. Lin Fengting's eyes remained unchanged, and he looked at Qin Weibai quietly. I want to borrow troops from the Lin clan. Qin Weibai whispered. Lin Fengting was silent. Qin Weibai also fell silent. How many people? Lin Fengting suddenly asked. 300 people. Xianyuan sword. Qin Weibai didn't look at Lin Fengting. She just quietly looked at the teacup in front of her. Xianyuan sword was not a sword. It was the most elite super troop of the Lin clan. Its average strength was at the peak of the fire-flaming realm. It was a super elite enough to compete with the Heaven Punishment troop of the Wang family of Beihai, and the Holy Disarmament Corps of the Vatican. 300 people were all the Xianyuan sword had. It was one of the trump cards of the headquarters of the Lin clan. In recent decades, it had been replaced by several generations, but it had never been used. If such a force was controlled by Qin Weibai, it could completely make up for the largest group of elites that the Samsara Palace lost in Snow Country, and the overall strength would be much higher than before. Lin Fengting was silent for a long time. The atmosphere was so oppressive that it almost froze. Do you remember what I said before? Lin Fengting suddenly asked. The Lin clan doesn't enter the secular world? Qin Weibai asked. No. Lin Fengting shook his head. I invited you before. Qin Weibai fell silent. After Snow Country, I hope you can control the Lin clan for me for 20 years. The master of Samsara Palace refused, and you didn't reply. Lin Fengting said. He emphasized the words master of Samsara Palace. Qin Weibai was still silent. If I can live. After a long time, Qin Weibai said softly. It's my business whether you can live or not. Lin Fengting's eyes were resolute, and he said meaningfully, I will do my best. It's your business whether you want to live or not. Qin Weibai's face was a little pale. There were countless people in the world who were unwilling to face the world. There were only two extreme reasons. Because the world was too cruel. Because the world was too warm. If you tell Tianlong some things, he may not blame you, and you will not become enemies. Lin Fengting said calmly. Do you believe what you said? Qin Weibai looked up at Lin Fengting. Lin Fengting was silent. He really didn't know whether he believed it or not. If he couldn't figure it out, he would not think about it. Lin Fengting asked simply, Are you willing to do it? Qin Weibai was silent again. After a long time she nodded. She took a deep breath and said, yes. She didn't say whether she was willing or not. She just said yes. Lin Fengting laughed. He took a pendant from his neck. The pendant was scarlet and small, in the shape of a sword. Put it on. Lin Fengting said, remember your promise. Qin Weibai took it and whispered, the Xianyuan sword. Don't ask me. Lin Fengting shook his head, lowered his head to drink tea, and said flatly, from now on, you are the patriarch of the Lin clan. There was one thing he didn't say. But Qin Weibai already understood. The patriarch of the Lin clan could mobilize more than the Xianyuan sword. Thank you. Qin Weibai held the pendant tightly in her hand. Lin Fengting shook his head. If you think you owe Tianlan, then the Lin clan owes you. You don't have to thank me. Qin Weibai's mouth moved. When she was about to speak, there was a sudden knock on the door. The three people on the balcony raised their heads at the same time and looked at the door. Who is it? Flaming Fire's tone was cold. There was no response from outside the door, but the knocking was still ringing, neither fast nor slow. Qin Weibai and Flaming Fire looked at each other. Lin Fengting remained calm. There were many experts in the Holy Land. Arceus was strong. The Pope was dangerous. But the Holy Land was too small. Lin Fengting couldn't destroy the Holy Land with one sword, but if he wanted to take Qin Weibai away, no one could stop him. Flaming Fire took a deep breath and glanced at Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai nodded. Flaming Fire walked over, opened the door calmly, and raised her eyebrows slightly. A woman in white stood quietly outside the door. The woman's face was covered with a veil, revealing only a pair of charming blue eyes. She was followed by a guard of the Holy Palace wrapped in armor, who seemed to be protecting her. Flaming Fire frowned slightly. Let me introduce myself. The woman smiled and said elegantly, I'm Angel. On the balcony, Qin Weibai raised her head and stood up at the same time. Your Highness the Holy Virgin of the Vatican? She walked over slowly and asked calmly. That's me. Angel nodded with a smile and looked at Qin Weibai. Her eyes were a little curious and amazed. Come in. Qin Weibai's tone was brief. Angel walked in slowly, and so did the guard beside her. Qin Weibai frowned. As the Holy Virgin of the Vatican, she was visiting others in the Holy Palace. Even her bodyguard followed her in. Was she being overly cautious? Or was it something else? Whatever the reason, she couldn't see Angel's sincerity. What's the matter? Qin Weibai asked. Angel's face also became cold. I have nothing to do. She took a step to the side and pointed to the guard who came in with her. He's looking for you. Qin Weibai was stunned and looked at the guard beside Angel. Before she could figure out what a guard who could trouble the Holy Virgin to lead the way in person meant, the guard standing quietly in the room had already laughed. His smile was low and evil, hoarse like a night owl. Qin Weibai's bright eyes narrowed slightly and she said calmly, Take off your helmet. Of course. The guard smiled and said, This is the minimum sincerity. The Holy Virgin Angel looked blank. But Qin Weibai was a little surprised. The guard spoke Chinese, and his pronunciation was perfect, without any awkwardness. But under the helmet was a very standard white face. This was a middle-aged white man about 40 years old. He had fiery red hair and a tough face. He was a well-deserved middle-aged handsome man. Qin Weibai knew this person. So she was a little surprised. Because in the information she had, the person in front of her didn't know Chinese. Melad? She asked in a low voice. She felt a little strange in her heart. It was a feeling that things were gradually getting out of control. It was very annoying. She didn't like it at all. Oh, you really know my identity. Melad smiled very happily, and his eyes looked extremely eager. You are my goddess, one of the ladies I respect most. Qin Weibai said calmly. Your identity? Does the second chief Melad have another identity? This is a secret. But I don't mind sharing it with you. Melad chuckled. He glanced at Angel and said, The Holy Virgin's acting skills are very good. You must not know that the Holy Virgin's Chinese is very good, but I don't mind. Let me introduce myself. I'm Melad, the second chief of the Holy Disarmament Corps of the Vatican. But I still like my other name or code name. Mellad laughed and looked proud. My name is Disciple. Disciple. Qin Weibai narrowed her eyes tightly. Whose disciple? Of course it's His Highness Disciple. Mellad laughed. Which highness? Qin Weibai asked in a low voice. A highness who wants to cooperate with you, Mellad said seriously. Qin Weibai laughed. Qin Weibai laughed. Her face was sharp and delicate, and her eyebrows and eyes were cold. As the corners of her mouth rose, her whole person carried a kind of lofty arrogance. So your highness doesn't have a name? You know him. He's not your enemy, but it's not convenient for him to reveal his name, Mellad said. You're playing tricks. Qin Weibai turned directly and said in a flat tone. Flaming fire, see the guest out. You shouldn't question my sincerity. Mellad looked at Qin Weibai's back. You have tried many people in the Holy Palace. This makes me sure of your purpose. If you really want to trace a list from many years ago, my highness can provide it to you. He paused. It's at least 80% of the list. Qin Weibai did not turn around, but everyone present could feel that her body was slightly tense, and it had been tense to the limit. Mellad grinned. My highness once talked about a friend. He said that she was a very strange person. She abandoned time in the most beautiful period of her life, but she didn't give up day and night. I don't. Mr. Lin. Qin Weibai turned around in an instant. Kill him. Her tone was unprecedentedly sharp, and there was a touch of madness in her eyes. Lin Fengting did not hesitate. He was the former patriarch of the Lin clan. The former patriarch was also a member of the Lin clan, and now it was the acting patriarch of the Lin clan who wanted to kill him. In an instant, sword light appeared in the living room with soft light. The sword light was dazzling. Mellad's expression changed dramatically, and his whole body shook violently. The domain of the invincible realm appeared in an instant. The whole living room was completely frozen. The living room was extremely quiet, but the sword moved extremely fast. The surging sword light condensed into one point, and a bolt of lightning suddenly appeared in the frozen space. The extremely sharp sword light tore the domain apart in an instant. The sword intent surged in the broken domain, but it did not overflow at all. Instead, it circulated repeatedly around the sword edge, as if it was superimposed. In the blink of an eye, the sword in Lin Fengting's hand was several times more terrifying than when he had drawn it out. The sword edge pierced straight into Mellad's chest. Mellad suddenly let out a low roar. He put his palms together in an instant. The sharp peak in Lin Fengting's hand paused slightly. Mellad's entire body flew out and smashed hard against the wall. The whole floor shook with a loud bang. Lin Fengting's eyes narrowed tightly. He didn't use all his strength in this sword strike, so it didn't cause much serious damage. But this didn't mean that this sword strike wasn't strong. He was at the peak of the invincible realm. In terms of strength, he was enough to enter the top 3 on the divine list. A casual sword strike was also a sword strike on the divine list. He also knew Mellad. The second commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps of the Vatican was definitely a famous figure in the Dark World. But in the intelligence system of the Lin clan, he only had the combat capability of the invincible realm. But in that instant, the strength that the other party had shown was absolutely incredible. With such strength, he was not far from Arceus, who had not been crowned. This was clearly a super expert who was close to the peak of the invincible realm. Follower? Whose follower? Lin Fengting took a step forward, and his eyes were completely focused. Does it make sense? Mellad shouted angrily. I came with the Holy Virgin. If you kill me, can you walk out of the Holy Land alive? Well, even if you can, does it make sense? Not only will you become enemies with the Vatican, but you will also lose a powerful ally. Qin Weibai stood there. Her body trembled slightly, and her delicate red lips were also gently opening and closing. For a moment, her mood fluctuated, and she seemed to be unable to speak. Flaming Fire had never seen the boss in this state. His emotions fluctuated violently. He wanted to destroy everything with madness and sadness, as well as a little surprise and disbelief that he had lost his usual calmness. Countless complex emotions flickered in his pupils. Flaming Fire didn't know why the boss was so excited. She thought of the words of Mellad, who claimed to be a follower. Some people abandoned time, but did not give up day and night. Who is your highness? After a long time, Qin Weibai said coldly. Her voice was obviously trembling. At this stage he is your friend. At least he will provide you with the list you want. The follower stood up straight, and wiped the blood from the corners of his mouth. All his spirits were locked on Lin Fengting, and he was fully prepared for the attack that the other party would hit him at any time. Friend. Qin Weibai sneered and said, if he can provide that list, he is one of the people I want to find the most. He just received the invitation, but he did not participate. The follower said, otherwise he would not dare to come to you. Qin Weibai stared at the follower coldly. The follower looked at Qin Weibai calmly. Where is the list? Qin Weibai suddenly said. In a safe place. When we arrive in Eastern Europe, I will give it to you. The follower smiled. Believe me, goddess. At this stage, we deserve your trust more than anyone else. So not only will you get the list, but you will also get my help. I am not only the deputy commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps of the Vatican, but I am also willing to be the sword in your hand in this Eastern European chaos. Because at present, most of the people you want to try are also the people we want to deal with. The words were straightforward and naked. Qin Weibai suddenly glanced at Angel, and her eyes were obscure. You should know the secret of Her Highness the Holy Virgin without me telling you. The follower was not flustered. She may not be trustworthy, but she will not reveal our deal. Angel snorted softly, but there was some panic in her eyes. She was the Holy Virgin of the Vatican. But saints still had secrets. But at this time, she suddenly felt as if she were completely transparent in front of these people in front of her. The follower knew everything about her. Qin Weibai also knew. Qin Weibai was silent for a long time. She seemed to have completely calmed down, and all the emotions disappeared from her little by little. After a long time, she slowly turned around and said coldly, I see. The follower narrowed his eyes and chuckled. This will be the most pleasant cooperation. I can guarantee it with my character. He put on his helmet. The conversation was over. Holy Virgin Angel walked out of the room with the follower again. Lin Fengting sent the two of them out quietly, but he was not in a hurry to go back. The footsteps of the two of them were getting farther and farther away. Vaguely, Angel's suppressed angry voice sounded. What else do you want? I want a bottle of fusion. This should be within the authority of Her Highness the Holy Virgin. You see, I am a gentleman and never make any excessive requests. Lin Fengting narrowed his eyes, returned to the room and whispered. He wants a bottle of fusion that belongs to the Vatican. Fusion. One of the top gene potions of the Vatican. Qin Weibai nodded and held the teacup. She did not seem surprised. Lin Fengting looked at Qin Weibai quietly. He also remembered the follower's words. Some people abandoned time, but did not give up day and night. He didn't know why Qin Weibai was so excited. He just felt that this sentence was a little contradictory. If he really abandoned time, how could he not give up day and night? And who was the highness behind the follower? Chapter 397. Tongming Temple on West Mountain had been abandoned for 3 years. In the eyes of many locals of Yuzhou, this was a reckless waste of natural resources. West Mountain of Yuzhou was very quiet and had a pleasant environment. Tongming Temple was one of the buildings with the longest history in West Mountain. The beauty of West Mountain was no less than that of Green Mountain. But this area had been the most mysterious place in Zhongzhou State since the founding of the People's Republic. It was conservatively estimated that there were at least 20 military bases with different functions in the entire West Mountain. The famous Eastern Excalibur Special Brigade of the Central Theater of Operations of Zhongzhou State was stationed here. This was the mysterious and iron-blooded West Mountain. A few years ago, Tongming Temple was one of the few tourist attractions in West Mountain. But 3 years ago, Tongming Temple was taken over by Kunlun City and became the headquarters of the Snowdance Corps in Zhongzhou State. With the decisive Battle of Heaven Capital, the Snowdance Corps was disbanded, and Tongming Temple became abandoned. In the past 3 years, the local government had applied to the army headquarters in Kunlun City in an attempt to reopen Tongming Temple. Although there were no Buddha statues in Tongming Temple, The environment in the Green Mountains and clear waters was enough to set up a top club in Zhongzhou State. Not only would it increase taxes for the government, but businessmen would also get a lot of benefits. However, Kunlun City had never relented. Now with the restart of the Snowdance Corps, it had once again become the base of the Snowdance Corps in Zhongzhou State. For 2 days after the high-level meeting, Li Tianlan had been staying in Tongming Temple. Time was running out. The entire special warfare system of Zhongzhou State was in action. As the only special warfare corps established after the Border Control Corps in Zhongzhou State, and it was a sharp sword for foreign expeditions, the high-level officials had extremely high requirements for the Snowdance Corps. In an elite corps of 20,000 people, the minimum threshold for soldiers was the Qi-controlling realm. The basic officers were required to have the strength of the ice-condensing realm. The minimum requirement for middle-level officers was the fire-flaming realm. And the high-level officials were all at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. The framework of the Special Warfare Corps of 20,000 people was not large, but it was extremely complete. Completeness also meant finesse. So Li Tianlan was very busy. He was pushed to a high position without preparation. He had not adapted to the change of identity at all. He had to form a special warfare corps with the most combat effectiveness in a limited time. Tongming Temple was also very busy. In 2 days, countless materials entered Tongming Temple and fell into Li Tianlan's hands. Kunlun City, the 4 special warfare headquarters, and the elites of the special operations bureaus of each province all appeared in Li Tianlan's sight. The elites of various theaters of operations, legions, and special forces were also within Li Tianlan's choice. Information about the major martial arts forces was also piled up on his desk. The leaders of the General Staff Department, General Political Department, General Armament Department, and General Logistics Department would come over almost every day. The General Staff Department provided some tactical suggestions. The General Political Department assisted Li Tianlan in taking charge of the personnel transfer of the Snowdance Corps. The General Assembly provided equipment and weapons, and the General Logistics Department finalized logistics. Massive, rigorous, yet chaotic. Everything looked extremely hasty. In the encampment of the Snowdance Corps in Tongming Temple, there would be changes almost every hour. For the time being, Li Tianlan still hadn't adapted to the change of identity, but he had to bite the bullet and carry on. In terms of the formation of the corps, Zhongzhou State did fully respect Li Tianlan's will. Nearly 15,000 soldiers of the 20,000-strong Special Warfare Battalion were from the Border Control Corps. To be exact, they were from the 40,000 troops transferred to the Sky Academy by Dongqing Wudi. The 4 generals headed by Li Zhonghu were also transferred from the Border Control Corps to the Snowdance Corps. In terms of level, the Snowdance Corps could be said to be an organization at the same level as the 5 theaters of operations. But it had a small number of people and a relatively single type of troops, so the organization was simplified as much as possible. The Snowdance Corps was headed by the marshal, with a vice-marshal, 2 deputy marshals, a supervisor, and a chief of staff. They formed the highest decision-making level of the Snowdance Corps. Under the corps were 2 divisional organizations, which were very orthodox. Different organizations shared different responsibilities from company, barracks, regimental headquarters to division headquarters, and finally formed a whole. Li Tianlan now had a rough list in his hand. He had contacted a lot of people in the past 2 days. There were many people who were kind to the Li family and hostile to the Li family. Most of the people Li Tianlan came into contact with, whether good or bad, basically gave him a clear attitude. So he knew very well that he had a good hand now. Marshal Yi Dongsheng, the deputy minister of the army headquarters of Zhongzhou State, the chief of staff, and known as the god of army, also felt that Li Tianlan had a good hand when he looked at the list drafted by Li Tianlan. From Li Tianlan's point of view, this list was simply gorgeous beyond words. The list was not long, but Yi Dongsheng looked very carefully and cautiously. In the office of the army commander of Tongming Temple, everyone looked carefully and cautiously. Li Tianlan, dressed in a decent military uniform and with the rank of marshal, sat behind the wide conference table. He quietly observed the big shots in the conference room and patiently waited for their reaction. Yi Dongsheng, the Minister of the General Staff, represented the Southeast Group. Fang Wenxi, the Minister of General Political Affairs, represented the Prince Group. Sun Jiyu, the Minister of Defense, represented the Special Warfare Group. Hua Qingfeng, the Minister of Security of Zhongzhou State, represented the academics. The northern faction still stayed out of it. Li Tianlan represented the giant group. The representatives of the 5 groups were silent. There was not much time. The preparation of the Snowdance Corps had reached the final stage. Li Tianlan, the army commander, drew up a list. The 4 big shots who assisted Li Tianlan in establishing the Snowdance Corps were responsible for approving it. If the opinions of the 5 people reached a consensus, they would report it to the army headquarters in Kunlun City at the same time. The Army headquarters and the Special Warfare System would hold an internal meeting to confirm the list and report it to the Cabinet and the Hidden Dragon Sea for final confirmation. Yi Dongsheng read the list in his hand bit by bit. There were too many names on the list that he was familiar with. Cool Breeze, Drifting Cloud, and Deep Dream of Sai City. Han Chongyang, the Yin and Yang Sword Master of Mount Shu. Yin Qinshi, the Phantom Sword Master. Su Chang'e, the Sword Justice of Jade Pool. Ling Shuangxue, the First Elder. Hua Qingfeng, the Sect Master of the Shadow Sect. All the famous experts in Zhongzhou State held different important positions in the Snowdance Corps. It was foreseeable that once these people joined the Snowdance Corps, they would definitely stand on Li Tianlan's side. Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud were both candidates for the deputy commander of the Snowdance Corps. The candidate for the chief of staff was Han Chongyang, the sect master of the Shadow Sect. There were 6 people at the highest decision-making level in the Snowdance Corps. But after entering Eastern Europe, there were 7 people. There was also a general of the giant group, Cheng Huaining, the current commander of the Arctic Ocean Command. Among the higher-ups, Li Tianlan would have an absolute advantage. At the grassroots level, nearly 3/4 of the soldiers came from the Border Control Corps. Now it had only been 2 days since the final maneuver. No one would forget the scene of 40,000 troops kneeling on one knee to Li Tianlan at the same time after the maneuver. This was indeed a good hand. As long as Li Tianlan was not stupid, his authority in the Snowdance Corps would be unshakable. This also showed that when Dongqing Wudi and Wang Tianzong sat at the gambling table, the giant group, Jade Pool, and Sai City had all clearly taken sides. And Mount Shu and the academics also supported part of the power. Yi Dongsheng's face was calm, but there was a little surprise in the depths of his eyes. He waved the list in his hand and said with a smile, "Your Highness has thought it through. I agree with this list. Marshal Yi is known as the God of Army. I feel at ease to get your affirmation." Li Tianlan chuckled, but his eyes were indifferent. "I agree with this list too." Hua Qingfeng, the Minister of Security of Zhongzhou State, smiled and was the second to express his attitude. He was the candidate for the Chief of Staff of the Snowdance Corps. As one of the core forces of the academics, the sect master of the Shadow Sect personally joined Li Tianlan's Snowdance Corps. The support of the academics was great. The other 2 frowned slightly, hesitated for a moment, and finally nodded without saying much. In the discussion of the 5 people, 3 of them had already made their attitudes clear. Even if they had different opinions, it was useless. "I will collect some opinions from within the Snowdance Corps, sort them out, and report them to the Army headquarters in Kunlun City together with this list." Fang Wenxi, the Minister of the General Administration, stood up and smiled. "Your Highness, if there is no accident, the Snowdance Corps can be completely determined tonight." Li Tianlan nodded, stood up and reached out his hand. "Thank you, Minister Fang." Fang Wenxi shook his head, shook hands with Li Tianlan, and turned to leave first. Yi Dongsheng narrowed his eyes and chuckled. "Your Highness's courage and spirit are really amazing." Li Tianlan glanced at him and said indifferently, "Marshal Yi, do you have anything to teach me?" "No." Yi Dongsheng wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Finally he smiled and said, "It's just a sigh." He looked at Li Tianlan with a complicated look in his eyes. Those who knew Yi Dongsheng's upward trajectory knew his story. The Yi family of Yuzhou was a well-deserved wealthy family in Zhongzhou State. In Yuzhou, it was one of the few behemoths whose foundation could be compared with the Bai family. In the past hundreds of years, It was a wealthy family that had produced more than one president. It had always been in the first-line sequence of the Southeast Group. It had always had a close relationship with the Wang family of Beihai, advancing and retreating together. But as for Yi Dongxing himself, he was a capable man cultivated and promoted by Li Honghe. He respected and admired Li Honghe, but his personal relationship with Wang Tianzong was also deep. The contradiction of personal feelings. The contradiction between his personal position and the family position suddenly became extremely clear after the collapse of the Li family. No one knew if Yi Dongxing had experienced a struggle in his heart, but his current position had already explained his choice. Yi Dongxing felt helpless. For many years he had been standing by Wang Tianzong's side. But every time he saw Li Tianlan, he would still think of Li Honghe's cultivation and promotion of him in those years. He wanted to remind Li Tianlan of something, even if it was only a few words. But when the words came to his mouth, he didn't know how to say them. It seemed that he couldn't say them either. Yi Dongxing raised his hand. He put the list in his hand on the desk in front of Li Tianlan, and looked deeply into Li Tianlan's eyes. Li Tianlan's eyes were calm and indifferent, stable and deep. Your Highness, be careful. I wish you a triumphant return as soon as possible. Yi Dongxing smiled and said softly. Li Tianlan glanced at him and nodded. Thank you. Yi Dongxing turned and left. Li Tianlan looked at his back, and was silent for a long time. He could feel Yi Dongxing's complicated mood at that moment. So his last sentence of "be careful" was particularly meaningful. Li Tianlan knew what that sentence meant, because everyone in Zhongzhou State was looking forward to him taking out the list. Li Tianlan was the core of the Snowdance Corps, but the entire Snowdance Corps was the result of the joint action of several wealthy families and forces in Zhongzhou State. The specific composition of the Snowdance Corps was also equivalent to the attitude of the wealthy families. Wang Tianzong's purpose of supporting Li Tianlan's promotion was self-evident. Perhaps he had never said that he wanted to replicate the treason case 20 years ago. But at this time, no one would ignore that possibility. The chaos in Eastern Europe was so dangerous, which also meant that the wealthy families might have different choices. Wang Tianzong and Dongqing Wudi were sitting on the gambling table at this time. Once Wang Tianzong started the treason case, it meant the beginning of the cruelest game between the Giant Group and the Southeast Group. If he won, Li Tianlan would get the Snowdance Corps and the expected prospects in the future. If he lost, the Giant Group would be doomed eternally. In everyone's view, such a gambling game was unfair, so Dongqing Wudi had other choices. He couldn't get off the gambling table now, but he could choose to throw away the cards in his hand when Wang Tianzong put down his chips. Although he would lose the chips he put down at the beginning, at least he wouldn't lose all of them. Although Dongqing Wudi was a director of Zhongzhou State and the executive minister of the army headquarters, it was not shameful to lose to Wang Tianzong and the Wang family of Beihai. So the list that Li Tianlan took out became the key to Dongqing Wudi's choice. If Li Tianlan took out a bad card and there were no real figures in the Snowdance Corps, it proved that Dongqing Wudi gave up the cards in his hand and Li Tianlan. But now Dongqing Wudi gave Li Tianlan a good card. More than 10,000 of the strongest elites of the Border Control Corps, several famous experts and generals of the Dongqing clan, and even persuaded the Sword Justice and First Elder of Jade Pool. On the gambling table between Dongqing Wudi and Wang Tianzong, he not only did not throw away the cards in his hand, but also bet all his chips fiercely. Even Sai City, Jade Pool, and even Mount Shu and the academics had never given up their support for Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan would have the absolute right to speak in the Snowdance Corps. But could all of this change the final outcome? No one could predict the result. Li Tianlan's good cards were worthy of the name. But the problem was that for everyone today, Wang Tianzong was equivalent to a king bomb. What kind of good cards could resist him? Be careful. Li Tianlan lowered his head deep in thought. This "be careful" was like a reminder or a courtesy. Li Tianlan didn't understand what Yi Dongxing meant. General Yi still can't let go of Senior Li's help. A gentle voice suddenly rang out. However, that's all he can do. This reminder is also the greatest amount of support he can offer. He has a good relationship with Wang Tianzong, and they are like brothers. He can't give Your Highness any other help. Li Tianlan raised his head, a little surprised. Standing in front of him was Hua Qingfeng, the Minister of Security of Zhongzhou State. He didn't leave the office after the discussion. His mentality is quite contradictory. Li Tianlan smiled calmly, took out a cigarette, and handed it to Hua Qingfeng. It's really contradictory. Hua Qingfeng took the cigarette, took a deep breath, and said calmly, "But who doesn't? For example, I came here this time to represent the academics' support for Your Highness. Now we are friends. But if the Wang family of Beihai really starts another case of treason, and repeats the tragedy more than 20 years ago, when the general trend is settled, the academics will also stand on the side of the Southeast Group." Li Tianlan glanced at Hua Qingfeng, and his eyes were a little strange. He was not surprised by the academic's choice. No matter how close an ally was, it was a completely different concept from one's own people. In the Snow Empire, before he truly entered a hopeless situation, the academy would always support his actions. But if the general trend was really set and could not be reversed, it was reasonable for the academics to abandon him and cooperate with the Southeast Group. This had nothing to do with being despicable or shameless. It was just the simplest choice and trade-off in politics, in order to pursue a new balance. Everyone could understand the reason. But Li Tianlan didn't expect Hua Qingfeng to say it. "It's very realistic," Li Tianlan said with a smile. "But it's acceptable. I can't change the academy's choice at the last moment, but I can change my approach," Hua Qingfeng said. Li Tianlan chuckled and didn't comment. He walked to the window and looked out at the Tongming Temple, with birds singing and flowers fragrant. The early morning sun fell, and the temple was peaceful. Hua Qingfeng looked at his back. Until today, this was the second time he saw Li Tianlan, but they were two completely opposite feelings. When they first met in front of the building of the army headquarters, Li Tianlan was pure and calm. But now Li Tianlan, he was wearing a military uniform with the highest military rank in Zhongzhou State. He was so young that his military rank, military uniform, and his figure looked a little weird. But in fact, this military uniform actually fit him very well. He stood there with his back to Hua Qingfeng. He was still pure, but there was a hint of looming strength and thinking. "Your Highness, you don't believe me?" Hua Qingfeng asked. "If I'm destined to fall, will the sect leader really change his choice? Even if he does, what's the point?" Li Tianlan asked. He called the sect leader, not the minister. The former represented the shadow sect. The latter represented himself. The latter, on the other hand, represented the elites of the academy. Hua Qingfeng's eyes narrowed and he said seriously, "If things really come to that point, I'll go with the flow. Although I'm not talented, I know the consequences of going against the general trend. But before things come to that point, the shadow sect is willing to support Your Highness unreservedly." His words were very clear. There was another meaning in this sentence. Even though the academics had expressed their support for him, they had their reservations. Li Tianlan didn't move and said expressionlessly, could express many meanings such as doubt, affirmation, questioning, or contempt. Hua Qingfeng didn't know what this meant for a moment. He was silent for a while and said calmly, "The shadow sect is willing to cooperate with Your Highness without reservation." "What's the reason?" Li Tianlan asked. Hua Qingfeng hesitated and finally said with a wry smile, "You can think of it as self-protection." Self-protection? Li Tianlan turned around and looked at Hua Qingfeng. Hua Qingfeng's strength was definitely not weak. Any expert of the half-step invincible realm, or even the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, was enough to be a rare expert in a country. The shadow sect was not weak either. Hua Qingfeng's disciples were all over Zhongzhou State. With his current status and the special nature of the shadow sect, as long as the academics protected him, he and the shadow sect would be safe. "The president wants to hurt you?" Li Tianlan's eyes were a little playful. "Of course the president won't hurt me," Hua Qingfeng said with a wry smile. But it's hard for him to put his mind on the special warfare system. The rise of the academics is too short, and it doesn't have a very prominent background. It can even be said to be a civilian cadre. Our strength in the special warfare system is extremely weak. Over the years, Although Principal Zhuang Huayang has cultivated many talents in the special warfare system for the academics, compared with the Southeast Group and the Prince Group, we are still far behind. The academics chose you at the beginning. The president also consulted me about the 10-year plan. Now the 10-year plan still counts, but your relationship with the giant group has caused some disagreements within the academics. Some people in the group have even suggested that the president focus on the military and politics and temporarily give up the right to speak in the special warfare system. Go on. Li Tianlan nodded. The president is under a lot of pressure. Although the academics is now the ruling group, it is destined to be restrained because of its lack of foundation. After the president retires, it will also be jointly squeezed by several other groups. The president's layout is very difficult. At this time, if there is no accident, it is a very correct choice for the group to focus on the military and politics. The president is likely to accept this suggestion. So, Li Tianlan looked at Hua Qingfeng and said, if the president accepts this suggestion, are you worried that the shadow sect is likely to become one of the bargaining chips in the deal between the president and other groups? Hua Qingfeng was a little helpless, but he still nodded. Li Tianlan was silent. In fact, Dongqing Wudi had talked about this problem with him for a long time, especially the shadow sect, which was evaluated by Dongqing Wudi as one of the most worthy targets. What Hua Qingfeng didn't know was that the truth was actually more exaggerated than he had predicted, and the pressure on President Li Huaqing was also much greater than he had imagined. After all, the rise of the academics was too short. They stood at the commanding heights of power, but it was difficult for them to suppress the veteran groups. With the help of Li Huaqing's position, it was rare for them to not fall into a disadvantageous position. Li Huaqing's term of office still had 3 to 4 years. He had to make arrangements for the academics in advance after he retired, and strive to not be squeezed too badly by the major groups. There was no doubt that the academics wanted to get more bargaining chips to use in the future, by focusing on the military and politics. However, according to Dongqing Wudi's analysis, it was extremely difficult for Li Huaqing to achieve this goal, and he was bound to give up some other things. Li Tianlan thought about the inside story that Dongqing Wudi had told him. After a long silence he asked, "What can you give me?" Hua Qingfeng was shocked. At present, the power I can mobilize in the shadow sect without being noticed is limited, but they are all elites. There will be about 5 Thundershocking realm experts, one of whom is at the peak of the Thundershocking realm. There are also 20 Fire-Flaming realm experts. Hua Qingfeng said, "These people can become your highness's personal soldiers." 5 Thundershocking realm experts and 20 Fire-Flaming realm experts. Although only one of them was at the peak of the Thundershocking realm, such a force was not weak anywhere. Li Tianlan nodded. He was not excited but continued to ask, "What do you want?" "Survival." Hua Qingfeng said, "If you win in Eastern Europe this time, you will play an important role in Zhongzhou State. I hope that the Shadow Sect can continue to survive in the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State." Li Tianlan nodded silently and suddenly said, "I don't want your personal soldiers." Hua Qingfeng's face changed. Li Tianlan continued, "But I need this force. If they can be completely trusted, I will ask them to go to Snow Country to find a person. Do you mind?" "Find who?" Hua Qingfeng asked. "Find my woman," Li Tianlan said. "Now she needs protection and strength more than I do." He did not say the name, but Hua Qingfeng already knew who it was. His tone was a little bitter. "Boss Qin? She is the enemy." In the eyes of the current camp of Zhongzhou State, Qin Weibai and the Samsara Palace were indeed no longer friends, but enemies. "She is my woman," Li Tianlan said heavily. Hua Qingfeng did not understand the meaning of this sentence for a while. It took him a long time to react. Qin Weibai was Li Tianlan's woman. Naturally, she would not harm him. Li Tianlan was the commander of the Snowdance Corps of Zhongzhou State. Qin Weibai would not harm Li Tianlan, nor would she harm Zhongzhou State. "Okay," Hua Qingfeng said. "I will communicate with my people. They may die." Li Tianlan turned around again and looked out of the window. "I have no regrets," Hua Qingfeng said in a deep voice and turned to leave the conference room. Hua Qingfeng walked very fast. He was not in the mood to enjoy the scenery in Tongming Temple. He just wanted to return to the Shadow Sect as soon as possible and send the power he had accumulated to Snow Country. When he walked out of the temple gate, Hua Qingfeng's footsteps paused. A middle-aged man with the rank of marshal was standing there, as if waiting for him to come out. He smiled calmly and gently. Marshal Yi? Hua Qingfeng raised his eyebrows. He was a little surprised and vigilant, and his eyes became a little cold. He finally walked out of Li Tianlan's office. In the eyes of others, this was an accident. But there was nothing against the rules. Yi Dongsheng blocked him here, which was a little bullying. Minister Hua, don't get me wrong. Yi Dongsheng smiled and waved his hand. I don't mean anything else. I just want to talk to you recently. I can meet you today, and I don't want to miss it. Hua Qingfeng's expression gradually became calm. He smiled and said, What's the matter, Marshal Yi? Here's the thing. After a brief hesitation, Hua Qingfeng slowly smiled. I visited South America a few months ago, and I saw that the young lads of the security department are really good. Ever since the minister took charge of the security department, the quality of the security department can be said to be the highest in the past few decades. Just this alone is enough to convince me. Marshal Yi, you flatter me. Hua Qingfeng shook his head. The tactics you left when you took charge of the guard department are still the model of the guard department's research. As for the recent ministers of the guard department, you can be called the first. Yi Dongsheng had also served as the minister of the guard department, and he was Hua Qingfeng's predecessor. Yi Dongsheng could sit in the position of deputy minister of the army headquarters, and Hua Qingfeng could sit in the position of minister of the guard department. It was originally a deal between the academics and the Southeast group. Tactics are tactics. Yi Dongsheng shook his head. Without the ability to execute, everything is in vain. Minister Hua is much better than me. Some time ago, I chatted with Tianzong and talked about the current spirit of the guard department. Tianzong is very concerned about this matter. Minister Hua, you may not know that the internal defense force of Beihai province had some problems some time ago. I personally think that with Minister Hua's ability, it is easy to change these situations. So Tianzong wants to talk to you. I wonder if Minister Hua will do me the honor? Internal defense force? Hua Qingfeng glanced at Yi Dongsheng in surprise. Yes, one of the most elite troops in Beihai province. Minister Hua, Tianzong wants to transfer you to Beihai to serve as the deputy commander of the Beihai Corps and the commander of the internal defense force. Of course, if you have other requirements, you can also put forward them. In terms of personnel transfer, the Wang family of Beihai will come forward to operate. Yi Dongsheng smiled softly. He added calmly, President Li Huaqing is under a lot of pressure. At present, it seems that it is difficult for him to take care of the problem of the special warfare system. Minister, it is time to make a decision in advance. Hua Qingfeng narrowed his eyes. The Beihai Corps was a super-large corps second only to the Border Control Corps, but it was equally elite. In terms of the system of Beihai province, the Beihai Corps was mainly responsible to the Wang family of Beihai, followed by Zhongzhou State. All the equipment, weapons, logistical supplies, and officer appointments of the Beihai Corps were completely dominated by the Wang family of Beihai. There was no need for high-level meetings. As long as it was reported afterward. The deputy commander of the Beihai Corps, the commander of the Internal Defense Force. This position was no lower than that of the Minister of Security, and even a little higher. Those who sat in this position were all corps members of the Wang family of Beihai. There was no doubt that if Hua Qingfeng agreed, he could also get this treatment. And the Shadow Sect might have more freedom to develop in Beihai province. Hua Qingfeng's eyes sparkled with the light of thinking. After a long time he smiled and said softly, General Yi, thank His Majesty for my kindness, but I still prefer the Department of Security. The smile on Yi Dongsheng's face faded imperceptibly. He didn't seem to expect Hua Qingfeng to refuse. Hua Qingfeng looked at Yi Dongsheng's face. His eyes were calm but firm. Goodbye. The academics gave up the right to speak in the special warfare system. The Shadow Sect would be in an awkward situation. So Hua Qingfeng had to make a new choice. The Wang family of Beihai seemed to be the best choice. But it just seemed so. For a super wealthy family like the Wang family of Beihai, the most valuable people in the entire Shadow Sect were probably Hua Qingfeng himself and several thunder-shocking realm experts. Even the experts below the peak of the thunder-shocking realm were not very valuable. As for those fire-flaming realm experts of the Shadow Sect, most of them were not even qualified to enter the Heaven Punishment Troop. Such a Shadow Sect was not qualified to be valued by the Wang family of Beihai. A deputy commander of the Beihai Corps and the commander of the Internal Defense Force might be all they had. In contrast, Hua Qingfeng preferred to choose Li Tianlan, because the Shadow Sect was not strong enough. Li Tianlan was not strong enough. His cooperation with Li Tianlan was a timely help. Both sides were trying to survive. Such cooperation was the most solid and worth looking forward to. Yi Dongsheng looked at Hua Qingfeng's back quietly. He looked a little regretful and took out his mobile phone. The phone was in a call mode. You heard it? Yi Dongsheng said helplessly. Yes. It was the voice of Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong on the phone. He refused us. He's very sober. Yi Dongsheng said he's worth it. People who can recognize their own value are the most valuable. Wang Tianzong smiled. Yi Dongsheng also smiled. It's a pity that the Shadow Sect is going to be won over by Li Tianlan. It's not a big problem. Wang Tianzong said. They are far from the power that can control the battle situation. They are not even enough to occupy the left and right parts. Yi Dongsheng agreed and suddenly said. I've read that list. There's nothing new. Nothing. It can only be said that we haven't looked carefully enough. Wang Tianzong said softly. Senior Li is good at forbearance and planning. It has been more than 20 years since the Li family collapsed, but unless I'm crazy, I won't believe that he was willing to accept failure. The upheaval in Eastern Europe this time is the key. Before dealing with Li Tianlan and the giant group, it's good if we can dig out some of Senior Li's chess pieces in Zhongzhou State. Are you sure Senior Li will take action? Yi Dongsheng asked. He has to take action. If he doesn't take action at this time, what's the point of planning? Just like Li Tianlan asked me in the Sky Academy, it's hard for me to cultivate a son like Sheng Xiao. At Senior Li's age, he can't cultivate a good enough grandson. He can't cultivate one even if he wants to. Well, Yi Dongsheng hesitated. What's wrong? Wang Tianzong asked. East Island. Yi Dongsheng's tone was a little dry. Wang Tianzong was silent for a while and said softly, someone is watching. It's okay. Yi Dongsheng nodded. Hang up. On the mountainside of Mount Dibing, Wang Tianzong hung up the phone silently and looked at the lake in front of him. The fishing rod extended into the lake in front of him, and there was a wooden barrel in front of him. There was no water in the barrel. There was nothing in it. Summer Solstice, who was in a long dress, weaved a wreath around Wang Tianzong. She put the wreath on Wang Tianzong's head and said with a smile, Stupid. There's no fish. I'm afraid I can't eat the grilled fish you promised me. What's the hurry? Wang Tianzong coughed and said solemnly, It's too early for lunch. Summer Solstice snorted, sat down beside Wang Tianzong, and leaned on him. Wang Tianzong looked at the lake in front of him with calm eyes. What are you thinking about? Summer Solstice touched his chin and asked. I'm thinking. Wang Tianzong narrowed his eyes. Did Senior Li really not make a move this time? Summer Solstice didn't speak. It could be said that she single-handedly set off the treason case of Zhongzhou State. At the same time, she smashed the murderous weapon of the Li family, Infinite Sky, and broke Li Guangtu's invincible state with the murderous weapon. But Summer Solstice didn't dislike Li Honghe at all. Wang Tianzong wore a bright and somewhat funny wreath on his head. He held Summer Solstice with one hand and remained silent. Did Li Honghe really not make a move? This was a question he never talked about with Yi Dongsheng. But Yi Dongsheng would definitely think of this. In fact, even if Li Tianlan took control of the Snowdance Corps, there would be no problem. Because he was the unparalleled Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State. At the most critical moment, the strongest sword was enough to destroy everything. If Li Honghe really did not make a move, it could only mean that in today's snow country, even if Li Honghe did not make a move, Li Tianlan had the power to check and balance Wang Tianzong. But how was this possible? Chapter 398. Wang Tianzong was fishing. Saint was fishing too. The scenery on Mount Dibbing was charming. The waves on the West Lake were vast. It was a magnificent scene. It was drizzling in linen. The light rain sprinkled all over the city. It was slow and intermittent. The West Lake in the rain was hazy and beautiful like a fantasy. Saint, dressed in casual clothes, rented a boat and went boating on the lake. He looked indescribably relaxed. Without the black cloak, which meant mystery and power, Saint looked like a young man with a slightly poor physique in the rain. He was 37 or 38 years old and had a pale face. He was not handsome, but he was very clean, so he looked younger than his actual age. The rain in Lin and seemed to weaken his sword intent. Saint, who was shrouded by the sword intent at any time, looked extremely soft at this time, without any fierceness before. The boat drifted aimlessly with the turbulent waves. Saint's eyes were focused on the waves in front of him. His eyes were not as sharp as before, leaving only the most focused seriousness and expectation. He was fishing. It seemed that he was fishing with all his heart. Such a Saint was focused and soft. But he was extremely focused and terrifying. A phone rang abruptly. Saint frowned, took out the phone, looked at the number and said helplessly, "You scared away my fish." A quiet voice sounded on the phone. "So I have no fish to eat, right?" "It depends on luck." Saint shook his head. "I'm in the center of the lake. I'll be there soon." The person on the other side of the phone said simply, and then hung up the phone. Saint put down the phone and continued to stare at the lake, lost in thought. He had an appointment with someone today, but it was not the person on the phone. It was an accident. The unexpected phone call and the unexpected person not only scared away his fish, but also disturbed his state of mind. Saint sighed softly. He had been recuperating in Lin, and for nearly half a month. He did not receive any news from any side, so his mind was extremely calm. He really hoped that his heart could continue to be calm. A black shadow suddenly appeared on the misty and hazy surface of the lake. The black shadow walked on the water under the gloomy sky, bringing up a gust of wind. The surface of the lake was shaking with the wind. The boat was tossed about in the turbulent water. Saint put down the fishing rod. In this situation, the fish would not take the bait no matter how stupid they were. The black shadow in the strong wind landed on the ship. The black figure was wearing a black cloak, and his body was hunched. As soon as his feet touched the ground, he started coughing violently. Saint frowned slightly and looked at his old buddy who had the best rapport with him. "Your injuries are very serious. Why aren't you staying at home? Why are you running around? What a tiring life." Military counselor resisted coughing and smiled. "I'm not like you. You hide in Lin and don't think about anything. There are some things that you can't do anything about," Saint said calmly. Military counselor was silent for a while and sat down next to Saint. Feeling his extremely weak breath, military counselor's voice was slightly solemn. "How could your injury be so serious? It's been almost half a month, and you haven't recovered at all? Who told you I'm recuperating?" Saint smiled calmly. "Then what are you doing?" Military counselor's voice was a little cold. "Learn the sword," Saint said seriously. "I'm learning the sword, the strongest sword." The sword of the chosen one was naturally the most difficult and the strongest. Military counselor's rising anger stopped. "How's the harvest?" he asked. "Difficult." Saint shook his head. Military counselor didn't speak for a while. The water calmed down again. The boat continued to float on the lake. Saint's palm suddenly lifted up. A big fat fish fell on the boat under the guidance of the fishing rod. Military counselor still didn't speak. Saint ignored him. He skillfully killed the fish, peeled off the scales, and removed the internal organs. There were some simple seasonings on it. Cumin chili. Saint smeared the seasonings on the fish. A weak but blazing flame ignited in his palm. It was very fast to grill fish by hand, and the temperature could be controlled at will. The fish was soon cooked. Saint gave half to military counselor. The two of them ate the fish in silence. The fish was grilled until it was crispy on the outside and tender on the inside, and the seasoning was just right. but the taste was average. Eastern Europe is very chaotic. The two threw the fish bones into the lake without public morality. Military counselor's hands flashed with ice. The ice turned into water and washed the oil stains in his hands. Military counselor said, "Oh, are you really not going to do anything?" Military counselor looked at Saint, who was calm and focused, and asked, "What can we do in our current state?" Saint asked back. He was telling the truth. In the Battle of Mount Dibbing, the 10 Thundershocking Realm experts of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital and the Earth Supermaster of Samsara faced an expert at the peak of the Invincible Realm. Although the state of that expert at the peak of the Invincible Realm was a little special, but the sword intent that reached the peak of the Invincible Realm did not weaken at all. Under that sword strike, not to mention the 10 Thundershocking Realm experts of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, even the general and duke who had vaguely surpassed the peak of the Thundershocking Realm almost died on the spot. If military counselor and Saint hadn't reacted quickly, they would also have died there. Or if Summer Solstice could continue to make another sword strike, the result would still be the same. Military counselor and Saint worked together to avoid the strongest sword intent at that time, but they were seriously injured and couldn't do anything in a short time. In their current state, going to Snow Country was completely courting death. Their role was even less than that of an elite of the Fire-Flaming Realm. Military counselor was silent. His aura was chaotic, and he seemed a little agitated. In her plan, we wouldn't have appeared on the battlefield in Eastern Europe. Saint said, "It's just that she's too confident and always thinks that she can control everything. But in the real chaos, everyone adapts to the situation. Who can really control everything? I'm here to discuss with you. Do you want me to do something?" Military counselor said. He was different from Saint. Different paths, different positions, and different responsibilities. Now he was also seriously injured. But even if military counselor was seriously injured, he could also do a lot of things. If you're not afraid of being exposed, you can do whatever you want. Saint said lightly, as long as you can bear the consequences. If you expose your plan for so many years, how do you think the boss will thank you? Military counselor smiled bitterly. He also understood what Qin Weibai meant. Although Samsara's foundation was insufficient, it was not really weak to the point that no one could use it. In fact, in detail, when they went to Mount Dibbing to besiege Summer Solstice, it was not necessary for him and Saint to go. Even Duke and Azura did not need to go. It was nothing more than sending some more people. The Purgatory of Heaven Capital could squander 10 experts of the Thundershocking Realm. The Samsara Palace could also do the same if they gritted their teeth. But in the end, Qin Weibai chose the 4 strongest combat forces among the 12 supermasters of Samsara, in order to prevent them from participating in the following chaos in Eastern Europe. However, now the largest group of elites of the Samsara Palace hidden in Eastern Europe had almost been wiped out, and the Samsara Palace had suffered heavy losses. Qin Weibai's plan would definitely be affected. Under such circumstances, could the trial in Eastern Europe continue? As long as you're calm, Saint said. The boss has the one from the Lin clan with him now. It's not a big problem. But she's asking for death, military counselor said in a deep voice. Saint fell silent, as if he did not know what to say. Why? Military counselor asked. This question was very interesting. In any case, military counselor could not figure out why Qin Weibai would take the initiative to seek death. He knew that Qin Weibai was facing the tribulation for Li Tianlan, but seeking death and certain death were two completely different concepts. One was active, and the other was passive. Military counselor did not know why, but he believed that Saint knew. Saint also called Qin Weibai boss. But the two had no real relationship of subordination. This was different from any other heavenly kings in Samsara. Most of the time, the two seemed to be cooperating. She can't get over it. Why? Saint sighed softly. When it came to this topic, there was an unconcealable tiredness in his tone. We can't stop her decision. But as far as I know, this matter is not without a turning point, he said softly. So as long as you're calm. Your heart is calm enough. Military counselor sneered. as if he wanted to vent his inner irritation on Saint. Saint shook his head, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. I have to be calm. His tone was soft. Only with a calm heart can I break through. In my current state, it's useless to go to Eastern Europe. But if I'm lucky enough to break through to the invincible realm in the near future, I can increase the boss's chances of survival. If I can enter the invincible realm, my sword intent should be able to fit with the strongest sword. Military counselor raised his head and looked at Saint. Will you enter the invincible realm? Sooner or later, Saint said. How sure are you to break through before the chaos in Eastern Europe ends? Military counselor asked. Now it seems that, Saint thought for a moment and told the truth. I'm not sure at all. Military counselor's anger began to rise again. With his relationship with Saint, Saint would not lie to him. If he was not sure at all, what was the difference between that and not being able to break through at all for the time being? You need to calm down. Saint said. Now you're going to lose your mind. Military counselor's anger stopped. I can't calm down, he said. The wind and rain by the lake fell on her black cloak, and it was cold. Military counselor laughed at himself. I've seen too many ungrateful things over the years. Do you know what I'm thinking? Saint was a little confused. Except for a few really cruel and unscrupulous people, the kindness that can be forgotten is not heavy enough. Military counselor said softly, Brother, if it weren't for her, I don't know what I would be like now. How can I forget this kind of kindness? How can I calm down? Saint lost his voice for a moment and then said blandly, Loyalty can make people crazy, but it can also make people rational. What's your choice? Loyalty was crazy. So was rationality. The latter was more in line with her requirements. The answer was very clear, very obvious, but also very bitter. It was also the answer that military counselor didn't want to face the most. What are you doing in Linen? Saint asked. I'm looking for someone. Military counselor said sullenly. I'm going to Tiannan next. Tiannan? Saint hesitated for a moment. It's just a layout. It's no big deal. Saint nodded. Tiannan was a special and sensitive place. If it was operated well, it would be a veritable foundation of an emperor. And that land, to some extent, was the foundation that Samsara Palace had specially opened up for Li Tianlan with the help of various forces. Now everything was developing very smoothly. After the chaos in Eastern Europe was over, Li Tianlan and the East Emperor Palace would officially rise there. Samsara Palace naturally couldn't give up easily. No matter what happened, they couldn't give up. Qin Weibai kept them in Zhongzhou state and didn't let them participate in the chaos in Eastern Europe. It was not because they couldn't play a role in the chaos in Eastern Europe, nor because it was dangerous, but because they could play a greater role in Zhongzhou state. In that case, you should leave early. Saint said calmly. With a shake of his wrist, another fish was pulled out of the water by him. It was slightly smaller than the previous one, but it still weighed 2 or 3 pounds. Another fish. Military counselor looked at the water and said, I have an appointment. Saint shook his head. They should be here soon. So this isn't a treat for me? Saint pointed to the fish on the deck. If you don't leave, it won't be a fish but a sword that will serve you. I can't stop you, Saint said. Saint said. He seemed to have thought of something and a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Military counselor immediately knew who Saint was making an appointment with. He shook his head and stood up. When he was about to step into the water, he suddenly said, Is that notebook useful? It's very important. Military counselor's eyes were full of undisguised reverence. Do you want to have a look? At my age, I have no hope of reaching the invincible realm. Military counselor shook his head. And I don't have much interest in the invincible realm. After all, the fighting of martial arts is not the most suitable stage for me. His figure stepped on the surface of the lake, and the wind suddenly rose. In the turbulent water, military counselor went away in a flash. Saint was still fishing quietly. He was not in a hurry, not arrogant, and extremely focused. The rain in West Lake gradually became heavier. The fog on the lake gradually became heavier. 2 people in white robes walked out from a vast expanse of white fog. They were a man and a woman, both carrying long swords. Both of them were about 40 years old. The man was slightly shorter, more than 1.7 meters tall, but his appearance was extremely outstanding. He was dressed in white and had white hair. His face was like a jade crown. This was a man who was extremely introverted. He did not show any sword intent or aura. The deepest impression he gave people was his smile, eyes, and the corners of his mouth. His whole body seemed to be smiling, and his smile was bright and even bright. The woman, on the other hand, was extremely tall. A conservative estimate would put her at 1.75 meters tall. Her black, soft, long hair almost reached her waist. Her face was undoubtedly extremely beautiful. She had a standard oval face, delicate and soft facial features, but this kind of beauty was extremely strange. Just like a woman without any temperament. She was not delicate, not cold, not charming, not calm, not coquettish. Her body did not have any temperament, so her absolute beauty looked extremely fragile. The man and woman in white calmly stepped across the lake and walked onto the boat under Saint. There was only one fish on the boat, and it was lonely. The man in white, whose eyebrows seemed to be smiling, chuckled and said in a mellow voice, "This craftsmanship is too bad. A fish and it's so small. It's not enough to eat." "Here comes the second one," Saint chuckled, and a big fish of 4 or 5 kilograms was thrown out of the lake by him. A sword intent appeared in the air. There was only one sword intent, but it was flying in the air with two completely different artistic conceptions. The big fish that Saint pulled up was still in the air. The scales, blood, and internal organs had begun to peel off in the rotation. When the big fish fell on the boat, it had become extremely clean. The man in white whistled and laughed happily. "One more," he said. "It's almost done." Saint smiled. He held the fishing rod in his hand casually and said calmly, "Has Tianlon looked for you? My level is not high enough." The man in white chuckled. "He didn't look for me, but he looked for Second Sister. Second Sister pulled me here. I'm an idler. Anyway, I have nothing to do. It's good to wander around in Eastern Europe." "Wander around?" Saint smiled and said, "You'll die." "How could it be?" The man in white's smile remained unchanged. "You didn't say anything, but Second Sister dragged me here. Little junior brother has sent me more than 500 text messages and bombarded me with phone calls these days. I have to go. Besides, you are not here. What's the point of staying on the mountain?" The long-haired woman who had been silent smiled gently. She was originally a clean woman without any temperament, but as she smiled, her entire person gained an incomparably moving charm. That kind of charm was faintly discernible, but for a moment, it was enough to make the mountains and rivers pale in comparison. Saint glanced at her and said with a chuckle, "How many people are you going to bring?" "I can't bring many people. About 80 to 100 are the real elites," the woman said. Her voice was as soft as the wind, quiet and indifferent. They were all the real elites. In their eyes, the real elites could not be like the Wang family of Beihai, whose average strength was at the peak of the fire-flaming realm. But if 80 to 100 people were selected, at least more than half of them would enter the fire-flaming realm. Saint nodded and did not express any opinion. He just said casually, "Don't transfer people from my place. They are all my and Chongyang's people." The woman's voice was calm. Saint agreed and said with a smile, "The Snowdance Corps is good." It basically gathered the strongest lineup of the Dongqing clan, Sai City, and Jade Pool. If the Shadow Sect is smart enough, it will also participate. "What's your job arrangement?" "No job." The man in white shook his head. "We thought it was troublesome. At first, we said that we would nominate me to be the chief of staff of the Snowdance Corps, but I wanted that position. Second Sister is lazy, so it's not easy to arrange our own people. So I declined the position of chief of staff. I took our own people to form a special operations group, which is convenient for action." Saint thought for a moment and nodded. "Okay. Senior brother, how is your injury?" The long-haired woman suddenly asked. "It's a little troublesome, but it's not a big problem. Give me time, and I will recover. Recently, I have spent all my energy on learning swordsmanship. If I can break through smoothly, My injury will heal faster, Saint said softly. So I'm afraid I can't go to Eastern Europe this time. Well, it's a little troublesome for me to go to Eastern Europe with my superficial identity. You go to Eastern Europe for Tianlan, so I don't have to talk about him. I just want you to try your best to help me take care of another person. Qin Weibai? The man in white raised his eyebrows. Please, Saint said softly. The man in white nodded. Senior brother, don't worry. Senior brother. Saint was not older than the man and woman in white, but the ranking between them was not because of their age. It was because of the sword. Whether in the Dark World or in Zhongzhou State, this man and woman in white were really famous figures. In the Dark World, the man's codename was Yin and Yang. The woman's codename was Phantom. In Zhongzhou State, their codenames had to be added with another word. Sword Master. Yin Qinshi, the Phantom Sword Master of Mount Shu. Han Chongyang, the Yin and Yang Sword Master of Mount Shu. Among the 4 famous swords of Mount Shu, whoever held the Nirvana sword was the first senior brother. The first senior brother was Nirvana Sword Master Wei Kunlun, who was also the first supermaster of Samsara Palace, Saint. Mount Shu was a very strange martial arts force. They were extremely united internally, but when it came to the outside world, they always made different voices. So they rarely expressed their opinions in politics. Many years ago, the standing minister of the army headquarters of Zhongzhou State was Dongqing Hanguang. The former standing minister of the army headquarters was Qi Beizong. Between these 2 ministers was Wei Yuanhang, the leader of the Prince Group and the uncle of holy disciple Wei Kunlun. For this reason, this generation of Mount Shu's Nirvana sword had always been considered to be biased toward the Prince Group. Zhongzhou State was no stranger to Yin Qinshi. She met Li Kuangtu, the young master of the Li family, when she was in her prime. She had a feeling that meeting Kuangtu had ruined her life. After Li Kuangtu's treason, the Li family collapsed, and Yin Qinshi also hid in Mount Shu. Now with the appearance of Li Tianlan, her position was naturally on Li Tianlan's side. Yin and Yang Sword Master Han Chongyang was a pure swordsman. It seemed that he had nothing to do with any of the 6 groups. However, he had a good relationship with Vermilion Bird, one of the 4 spirit generals of Zhongzhou State. They were close friends, which seemed to be his position. As for Great Void Sword Master Li Beitian, the absolute main force of East Emperor Palace, he naturally stood on Li Tianlan's side. The Mount Shu sword masters had different positions, but all the grievances and disputes were outside Mount Shu. Because there were only swords in Mount Shu, there were no positions, no politics and disputes. However, what everyone in this generation didn't know was that the 4 great sword masters of Mount Shu, both inside and outside, seemed to have a unified position quietly. The identity of Nirvana Sword Master Wei Kunlun might still be in the Prince Group, but Saint Wei Kunlun was the super master of Samsara. The 3rd fish took the bait. Han Chongyang flicked his fingers and ignited the fire. The aroma of grilled fish filled the air. The 3 quietly finished the fish. Han Chongyang said, "Second sister is going to visit Senior Li. Senior brother, do you want to go together?" Saint shook his head. "I won't go." The eaten fish bones were thrown into the lake again. Han Chongyang and Yin Qinshi left West Lake at the same time. The rain and linen stopped. There was still fog on the lake. Saint, who had not eaten enough, continued to fish. He looked up at the sky without rain, lowered his head, and carefully took out a blue notebook from his arms. For any expert in the Dark World, this notebook could be called an absolutely priceless treasure. The blue notebook was not valuable. It was the most common weekly diary in the Sky Academy. What was precious was the handwriting inside, which recorded the most glorious years of a real chosen one. His forbearance, his plan, his rise, his breakthrough, his love, and his martial arts. The handwriting in the blue weekly diary was not beautiful, but every stroke was fierce and arrogant. Even after many years, it still seemed to have sword intent. Saint's eyes were focused and almost devout. The original reason why he joined Samsara Palace and became the first supermaster of Samsara was because of this notebook. But it was not until recently that he really held this notebook in his hand. This was his road to the invincible realm. Saint. The disciple of the Chosen One could be called Saint. Saint quietly flipped through the notebook in his hand. His movements were soft and he was quiet and focused. From weak to invincible in the world, to supreme. A magnificent and sorrowful song was written on the paper. Saint never put a word in the notebook, not even a punctuation mark. He tried his best to grasp every change of mind, every realization and thought in the words. The martial arts of the chosen one was recorded at the end of the notebook. It was the most detailed and systematic record, but it was also the messiest at the same time. It seemed that the chosen one had inadvertently recorded it when he was sorting out his thoughts. Martial arts realm Kendo. The content was profound but not mysterious. Saint looked at it quietly. There were not many records about martial arts. On the front and back, the fierce handwriting covered 7 pages, like 7 chapters. Saint had read the last chapter. He didn't know how many times he had read the last chapter. In the 7 chapters about martial arts, there was a sentence at the top of each chapter. A sentence from the Analects of Confucius. The dead are like men, unwilling to part with day and night. Between day and night, there seems to be sword intent soaring into the sky. There should be light to reflect the vastness of heaven and earth. There should be darkness to show the truth of the world. There should be day and night in heaven and earth, and so should the sword. The sword of day and night can cut the sky and break the sea. Chapter 399. From afternoon to night, Tongming Temple welcomed a rare peace. Li Tianlan also had more time to think about what he had done. Eastern Europe was in chaos. The Snowdance Corps, which had been established to deal with the chaos in Eastern Europe, had now become a direct agency to receive Eastern European intelligence. In the extremely chaotic situation, countless messages were transmitted from Eastern Europe to Yuzhou every day. They were immediately sent to the Snowdance Corps and placed in front of Li Tianlan. There was an endless stream of information. Yesterday morning, the president of IM met with Jiang Qianyan, the director of the board of directors of East Dynasty International Group in South America, and eagerly hoped that East Dynasty Group would invest in IM. Jiang Qianyan actively expressed his attitude of cooperation with IM. The two sides talked for more than 2 hours and successfully finalized the first phase of investment of about $8 billion. Yesterday afternoon, the Morton family, a wealthy family in Eastern Europe, had a friendly meeting with Kassrotter, the president of the Men in Black from Star State. Early this morning, the deputy prime minister of Snow Country made an appointment with Grand Duke Irene Qingtong Wang Rothschild, the Queen of Shadows of Europe. It was said that the Rothschild family was likely to invest in the 6 major banks of Snow Country in the near future. At noon today, Patriarch Igor, one of the 4 patriarchs of the Eastern Orthodox Church in Eastern Europe, was attacked by an unknown force when he was holding a coming-of-age ceremony for the young master of the wealthy family, Vasily. In less than 2 hours, the Cardinal Archbishop of the Vatican, Brian, was invited to Snow Country. The young master of the Vasily family publicly announced that Brian was his godfather, and he would receive blessings from the European Holy Land. Each piece of intelligence indicated that the situation in Eastern Europe was constantly changing. However, no one would know whether this change was good or bad until the final result was obtained. However, what was certain was that the various wealthy families and countries in Eastern Europe had become the targets of the superpowers that had entered Eastern Europe. Conversely, the various superpowers were also the targets of the local forces in Eastern Europe. So Zhongzhou State was in a hurry. Because in a sense, before Li Tianlan entered Eastern Europe, Zhongzhou State had always been outside the game. Zhongzhou State used a few days to form the Snowdance Corps. It seemed like a child's play, but in fact, no one was willing to give up the interests of Eastern Europe. Li Tianlan moved very quickly. It took him just 2 days to finalize the final list of the Snowdance Corps. Now the list had been brought to the army headquarters in Kunlun City by Fang Wenxi, the minister of the General Political Department of Zhongzhou State. While waiting for the result in silence, Li Tianlan could think about whether there were any omissions on the list. The list had already been taken away by Fang Wenxi, but Li Tianlan still had a copy. Li Tianlan spent the whole afternoon studying the list in his hand. He could feel that Zhongzhou state did not want to give up the interests of Eastern Europe in a hurry. So when determining the list, he inevitably thought about some things that were not thorough enough. Now, after looking at it in detail and carefully adjusting the positions behind several names, he suddenly felt that the list was much more pleasing to the eye. There was a knock on the door. Li Zhonghu, dressed in military uniform but without a military rank, stood at the door and scratched his head. "Your Highness, it's time to eat." More than half of the 40,000 troops of the Border Control Corps had returned to their respective stations, but more than 10,000 of the strongest people were still stationed in the Sky Academy. Some excellent officers at the middle, senior, and even at the grassroots level had been transferred to Tongming Temple for a short training. The officers of the army headquarters and those of the special warfare system were all officers. They did not seem to be much different, but in many cases, they had two completely different ideas of doing things. Now it was the two principals of the Sky Academy and the Deep Sea Academy who were training the officers in Tongming Temple. Li Zhonghu was also on the training list, but he was too lazy to receive any training. In the case that Li Tianlan had not confirmed his bodyguards and secretaries, the Major General of the Border Control Corps consciously worked as a doorman for Li Tianlan. "There's no hurry to eat." Li Tianlan shook his head, handed the list in his hand to Li Zhonghu, and said softly, "Take a look." Li Zhonghu froze and walked in to take the list in his hand. Familiar names appeared in his sight one by one. He grinned from ear to ear. "Good," Li Zhonghu said with a smile. "Your Highness, if Zhongzhou State draws up the Snowdance Corps according to this lineup, then our words in the Snowdance Corps will carry weight." Li Tianlan smiled and said calmly, "It shouldn't be a big problem. The establishment of the Snowdance Corps would fully respect his will." This was a good thing, but also not a good thing. Wang Tianzong was an ambitious man who really knew what the rules were. He forced Dongqing Wudi to sit at the gambling table, but at the same time, he also gave Dongqing Wudi hope to gamble with him. This so-called hope was the right to speak of the Snowdance Corps. Li Tianlan controlled the right to speak of the Snowdance Corps. Even if Wang Tianzong wanted to reenact the treason case more than 20 years ago, it would not be easy, and he would not do it secretly. At the very least, Li Tianlan had time to react. But similarly, if Li Tianlan fully controlled the Snowdance Corps, the treason case more than 20 years ago would be staged. Once Li Tianlan was defined as a traitor, then the Snowdance Corps, which gathered the strongest lineup of the giant group, Sai City, the Li family, Mount Shu, and Jade Pool, would also be wiped out. At that time, all the forces involved with Li Tianlan would end up extremely tragically. Therefore, the Southeast Group would certainly not object to the list of the Snowdance Corps. This was the bargaining chip that Wang Tianzong had to give to Li Tianlan. Absolutely centralized power also meant absolutely centralized main responsibility. In the chaos of Eastern Europe, Li Tianlan would either soar to the sky with the Snowdance Corps and laugh to the end, or he would fall into hell with all the forces related to him. What Li Tianlan thought most now was what Wang Tianzong would do. Or how would he replicate the treason case more than 20 years ago within the Snowdance Corps? If one wanted to speculate on Wang Tianzong's method, one must have some understanding of the treason case more than 20 years ago. Li Tianlan was now the Marshal of Zhongzhou State, and had the authority to know about the treason case. In the past 2 days, he had also flipped through some of the materials left behind, but to no avail. It was a normal transfer of personnel, a border conflict that seemed like a coincidence, and the orders given by the higher-ups at the right time. Everything looked normal, and there was not the slightest problem. But in this kind of calm without any abnormalities, Li Guangtu's treason, the collapse of the Li family, everything became out of control in an instant. Li Tianlan knew that he couldn't find anything definite with these materials, but he didn't expect that he couldn't find any clues in these materials. Perhaps only the core figures of Kunlun City, the Prince Group, and even the Wang family of Beihai knew the real inside story. And these people were destined not to tell Li Tianlan the inside story. Li Zhonghu put the list on the desk. Li Tianlan frowned and walked to the desk. He stared at the list on the desk thoughtfully. If the treason case 20 years ago was a flawless trap, then it was now a perfect trap. Then today, more than 20 years later, in the chaos in Eastern Europe, Li Tianlan could grasp at least two important threads. No matter how chaotic the chaos in Eastern Europe was, if Wang Tianzong wanted to charge him with treason, the two people of the Snowdance Corps would play a vital role. One was the vice marshal of the Snowdance Corps. The other was the supervisor of the Snowdance Corps. The two of them came from the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City respectively. They were also the only two important chess pieces in the Snowdance Corps that Li Tianlan couldn't control. Li Tianlan reached out and pointed at the list on the desk. Li Zhonghu walked to the water dispenser, poured a glass of water for Li Tianlan, and put it in front of him. Li Tianlan glanced at him and said with a smile, "Will the Major General of the Border Control Corps shorten his life by serving tea and water?" "That's not possible." Li Zhonghu chuckled and said, "I was a bodyguard for Marshal Dongcheng. Now I'm a bodyguard for Your Highness. There's no difference." "Your Highness, why don't you mention it to your superiors? I don't want to be a damn division commander. How about I be the commander of your bodyguard company? Old Li doesn't look ugly, and his strength is passable. It's not shameful to take him with me." "It's not shameful." Li Tianlan laughed and said, "But I'm not qualified to take a general with real power as a bodyguard." "You're the most qualified," Li Zhonghu said disapprovingly. At the peak of the Li family, there were sacred bodyguards around every highness of the Li family. Which bodyguard wasn't a general with real power? Wasn't he an expert famous in the dark world? If you stand at the peak of Zhongzhou State one day, it's possible for you to be promoted 2 levels in a row, let alone a major general. Li Tianlan suddenly fell silent. He seemed to think of something, and his eyes suddenly shone with an amazing light. "I don't want to eat," Li Tianlan said. "Prepare the car and go to the Hidden Dragon Sea." Li Zhonghu froze, stood up straight, saluted, and turned to go out. Li Tianlan picked up the red confidential phone on the table and dialed a number. The phone was quickly connected. "Director Han? I'm Li Tianlan." Li Tianlan held the phone and said calmly, "Hello, Your Highness." A low and soft laughter sounded on the phone, very kind and polite. On the other end of the phone was the phone of Han Yi, the deputy director of the General Office of Zhongzhou State Center. Of course, his position in the General Office was only nominal. The real place of work was in the office of President Li Huaqing. It could be said that he was the big secretary beside Li Huaqing, and the real first secretary of Zhongzhou State. Li Tianlan smiled, gently tapped the list in front of him and said, "I have something to report to the president. I wonder if it's convenient?" The person on the other end of the phone said, "Wait a minute." Hani seemed to ask Li Huaqing for instructions. Soon he picked up the phone again and said with a smile, "Your Highness, Mr. President asked you to come over." He paused and calmly reminded, "At 9 o'clock, the president also has an appointment with Secretary Wang of Wuxia to talk." Li Tianlan looked at his watch. It was 7:10 in the evening. Based on the current road conditions in Yuzhou, he would have more than an hour to report his work before Li Huaqing met Wang Qinglei of Wuxia. When he arrived at the Hidden Dragon Sea, Li Tianlan said thank you, hung up the phone, and turned to walk out of the office. Li Zhonghu had prepared the car and personally acted as the driver. The car drove at a constant speed to the Hidden Dragon Sea. Li Tianlan sat in the back seat and opened the window. The hot summer night wind poured in, and mixed with the cold air in the car, it was a little cool. Li Tianlan lit a cigarette, but his mind was clearer than ever. "I thought wrong about one thing," Li Tianlan said. Li Zhonghu responded, waved his hand, and refused the cigarette that Li Tianlan handed over. His hands were on the steering wheel, meticulous. The car drove very steadily. "I've been thinking about how the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City will deal with me." Li Tianlan smiled and said self-deprecatingly, "In fact, I'm afraid, but I don't want to admit it." He always felt that he would not be afraid of anything. But since he entered Tongming Temple and put on the marshal's military uniform, he had been afraid and panicking. The discomfort of suddenly being in a high position was fear. The confusion of not knowing how the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City would make a move was fear. The worry of forming the Snowdance Corps, but not knowing what the road ahead would be was fear. Under great pressure, there were some things that he didn't want to think about, but he couldn't help thinking about. This was also fear. He was afraid of death, afraid of failure, afraid of holding a good hand, but after losing, he would let everyone be doomed eternally. But the moment he sat in the car and left Tongming Temple, he realized that all his worries and fears were meaningless. Because it was impossible for him to know the plans of the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City, and it was impossible for him to influence their decisions. The only thing he could do was to control his own power and do his own thing. The chaos in Eastern Europe was an unprecedented opportunity and danger for him. Instead of worrying about gains and losses and guarding against the enemy's sharp knife that he didn't know when it would stab him, it was better to integrate the resources in his hands to create a favorable situation for himself as much as possible. The car was dark. Li Tianlan's eyes were clear. "Your Highness, do you have a way to reverse the predicament?" Li Zonghu asked with a laugh as he drove. "There is no way. It's just that we can't be suppressed by them all the time. We can't see the plan of the Wang family of Beihai yet. If we take the initiative to stick our noses out and let them lead us, what does that mean? We can't see their plan, but we will see it sooner or later. They prepare theirs and I prepare mine. It's too early to say who will win and who will lose." Li Tianlan shook his head. His eyes were calm and peaceful. Since returning to Huiting from the polar region, his state of mind seemed to have become so calm for the first time. The car went on Chang and street under the night light and finally entered the Hidden Dragon Sea. The Hidden Dragon Sea shone with a hazy shimmer in the night. The hazy light was reflected in the lake, which was called the sea. The waves were sparkling, and the whole Hidden Dragon Sea looked mysterious and solemn. "Have you been here?" Li Tianlan asked curiously. This was the first time he came to the power center of Zhongzhou State. Through the curtain of night and lights, the antique pavilions and terraces were hazy in the water ripples. This kind of scene was beautiful, but it was not charming. Instead, it was indescribably solemn. I had the honor to come here once with the marshal, and we went to Jinqiu Pavilion. Li Zonghu said with a smile. Jinqiu Pavilion was the office of President Li Huaqing, and it was also the rumored office of the president. Li Tianlan nodded and looked at the scenery outside the window in silence. "Where is Zhuanyuantai?" Li Tianlan suddenly asked. Li Zonghu was stunned. He was silent for a few seconds, and then whispered, "In the middle of Jinqiu Pavilion and West Flower Hall, slightly behind," but he wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. "There is no Zhuanyuantai in the Hidden Dragon Sea." Li Tianlan calmly said a fact that was absolutely not friendly to him. Now there was only Kunlun Pavilion in the Hidden Dragon Sea, but no Zhuanyuantai. More than 20 years ago, before the Li family collapsed, when Li Honghe was still the state-protecting god of war of Zhongzhou State, Zhuanyuantai in the Hidden Dragon Sea was the power center of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State. With the collapse of the Li family, Kunlun City rose, and the Gu family built a city in Kunlun Mountain. Zhuanyuantai in the Hidden Dragon Sea also became Kunlun Pavilion. In fact, the building did not change, nor did its location. It was just that the plaque of Zhuanyuantai was taken down and replaced with Kunlun Pavilion. It was a very simple move, but it represented the rise and fall of the Li family and the Gu family. Behind the scenes, it also represented the life and death, honor and disgrace, and ups and downs of countless people. Zhuanyuantai could not be seen in the Hidden Dragon Sea, but Zhuanyuantai had always been in Li Tianlan's heart, where he could always see it. There will be in the future. Li Tianlan stared at the night outside the window and said calmly. Jinqiu Pavilion was in sight. Li Zonghu slowed down the car, looked at Li Tianlan, and whispered, "Your Highness, when you come back from Eastern Europe, it will be very close to rebuilding Zhuanyuantai. So I can't lose." Li Tianlan laughed. "No matter who I face, I can't lose." When the car stopped in front of Jinqiu Pavilion, Li Tianlan saw two figures standing in front of Jinqiu Pavilion at the first time. One was Han Yi, the head of the president's office. The other turned out to be President Li Huaqing. The president greeted him in person. Even if Li Tianlan's state of mind was calm, he couldn't help feeling flattered when he saw this scene. He quickly got out of the car, took a few steps forward, stood at attention, saluted and said calmly, "Mr. President." Comrade Tianlan. Li Huaqing smiled and reached out to shake hands with Li Tianlan. His expression was elegant and gentle. Let's go in and talk. The two entered the office of Jinqiu Pavilion one after the other. Hani served freshly brewed tea. When walking out of the office, the secretary of Zhongzhou State, who had become a governor-level senior official at the age of 40, subconsciously looked back at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan sat there quietly, dressed in a military uniform, and the martial rank on his shoulder was shining in the light. Military rank, military uniform, calm but a little too young face. Even if he had enough psychological preparation, Hani still couldn't help feeling a little shocked when he saw this scene. He was a little self-deprecating and emotional. He gently closed the door and smiled at Li Zhonghu, who had already gotten out of the car. Perhaps because the academics did not fully support the giant group at the high-level meeting, Li Huaqing was extremely polite to Li Tianlan. He did not take a seat behind the desk, but sat with Li Tianlan in the reception area of the office, completely in the posture of old friends chatting. Li Tianlan drank tea silently, except for a little surprise when he saw Li Huaqing go out to greet him at the beginning. His expression became calmer after entering the door. Tianlan, how is the list of the Snowdance Corps coming along? Li Huaqing smiled and took the initiative to ask. Not bad. Li Tianlan nodded. The army headquarters in Kunlun City are very supportive of the formation of the Snowdance Corps. We had a meeting at noon. I have already handed the list of the Snowdance Corps to the general administration. There should be news soon. Li Huaqing said, and held the teacup, a little hesitant. He was silent for a while, then slowly said, to be honest, from the perspective of pure state affairs, I'm relieved to let you lead a corps. Eastern Europe is very chaotic. If we want to make a breakthrough in the chaos, it's really difficult to be steady. We need a young leader with courage and drive to fight for what we can fight for Zhongzhou State. Between you and Dijiang, I'm more optimistic about you. But from a personal point of view, your position is very sensitive. Wudi and I have some concerns. Some things are hard for us to stop. Since it has happened, we can only try to seek a result that is beneficial to everyone. Tianlan, if you need my help, I will try my best. In the private meeting, President Li Huaqing's words were direct and frank. There was no hypocrisy between them, and he came straight to the point. After all, Li Tianlan was still an ally of the academics. If it weren't for his relationship with the giant group, Li Tianlan would have officially entered the academics. With the combat capability of the invincible realm, he would almost be the #1 expert of the academics. Such a figure deserved the attention of anyone in Zhongzhou State. Moreover, although President Li Huaqing had now planned to give up the special warfare system, it was only because of the trade-off between the military and the special warfare system. If possible, he would naturally fight for it. In this Eastern European chaos, if Li Tianlan could block the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City, the academics would have a lot more room to operate. To say the least, even if the relationship between Li Tianlan and the academics would gradually drift apart in the future, in the current situation, as long as he still existed, the academics would have a lot more room to operate in the future. If Li Tianlan really died in Eastern Europe and was executed for treason, the giant group would fall apart. Under the violent social turmoil, the pressure on the academics who cooperated with the giant group would be unimaginable. In any case, as long as it was possible, Li Huaqing would give Li Tianlan some necessary help. I came here today to ask Mr. President for a person. Li Tianlan drank tea and said softly, Who? Li Huaqing raised his eyebrows. The status of the Snowdance Corps was extremely important now. Most of the people in Zhongzhou State, as long as Li Tianlan wanted them, could basically be transferred here now. Li Tianlan deliberately came to him to ask for a person, which could only show that this candidate was extremely special. Li Tianlan smiled and said softly, In the past 2 days, I've looked up some information about the treason case more than 20 years ago, but I got nothing. Li Huaqing smiled bitterly and did not speak. The treason case had been the most influential and worst case in Zhongzhou State for more than 20 years. Now the remaining files clearly pointed to Li Guangtu's treason. Everyone knew that this matter was very strange, but they could not find any evidence at all. What was the use of Li Tianlan studying those materials that had been turned over? Those materials. They don't make any sense. Li Huaqing said softly. They really don't make any sense. Li Tianlan said. So I put those materials back. But I think even if the materials are meaningless, the people are always meaningful. If we can find a person who has experienced the treason case, even if we can't figure out what happened that year, we can at least reduce the probability of the treason case in Eastern Europe. A person who has experienced the treason case? Li Huaqing narrowed his eyes and looked at Li Tianlan. Oh, desert prison fireman, Li Tianlan said calmly. The sacred guard beside my grandfather. More than 20 years ago, he was the first vice-marshal of the Border Control Corps. Apart from my father, he is the most responsible person in the treason case in Zhongzhou State. Chapter 400. Fireman Li Huaqing had heard the name more than once. At the peak of the Li family, every sacred guard around the god of war was a strong man. For example, Yu Donglai now. At the age of more than 70, his state had already deteriorated severely, and now he could barely stay in the thunder-shocking realm. But no one dared to underestimate Yu Donglai, because he was poison doctor. Among the 5 sacred guards around Li Honghe, Yu Donglai, who was at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, was the weakest in terms of realm and combat capability, but his means of using poison were weird and impossible to guard against. Li Honghe had never been defeated in hundreds of battles in his life, and Yu Donglai's ability to poison was indispensable. Among the 5 sacred guards, Fireman had the lowest realm, but his combat capability was the strongest. Not to mention how powerful he was at his peak. At the end of the treason case, Fireman, who was seriously injured, killed more than one superior of the half-step invincible realm in a heavy siege. If it weren't for more than 20 years of prison life that destroyed his potential, Zhongzhou State today would have at least one more invincible realm expert, who could be listed on the divine list. Tribulation of Sai City directly entered the invincible realm from the Qi-controlling realm. Fireman was looking for a way to enter the invincible realm from the fire-flaming realm. Once this extraordinary road went far enough, the combat capability he exerted was completely incredible. The academics needed experts with enough influence in the special warfare system. So the academics had the idea of Fireman before. 3 years ago, during the final battle of Heaven Capital, Samsara Palace and Zhongzhou State were still in a cooperative relationship, but the codename Fireman appeared more than once in the list of elites sent by Zhongzhou State to East Island. But in the end, because of the opposition of the Southeast Group and the Special Warfare Group, Fireman still stayed in the desert prison. Now that Li Tianlan had a high enough status, enough power, and a suitable opportunity, he would naturally try his best to let the sacred guard imprisoned in the desert see the light of day again. Li Huaqing hesitated, looked at Li Tianlan's calm face, and didn't speak for a while. Li Tianlan waited quietly. Things are a little troublesome. Li Huaqing was silent for a while before he slowly said, Fireman was the vice-marshal of the Border Control Corps more than 20 years ago. In the case of treason more than 20 years ago, if Li Guangtu was the main person responsible, then Fireman was equivalent to the secondary culprit. The most important thing was that even now, Fireman was not a dispensable character in Zhongzhou State. With his combat capability, after cultivation he was absolutely expected to be on an equal footing with the top superiors of the half-step invincible realm, which was equivalent to the tribulation 3 years ago. It would be more than troublesome to release such a character under the pressure of the Southeast Group and the Special Warfare Group. There was also a considerable risk. I know. Li Tianlan's tone was calm, but there was an imperceptible sharpness in it. Please do your best, President. Li Huaqing was stunned and looked into Li Tianlan's eyes. Li Tianlan looked at Li Huaqing calmly. His eyes were firm. He knew what Li Huaqing was thinking. Li Huaqing also knew that Li Tianlan knew what he was thinking. If the giant group joined forces with the academics, it would not be difficult to get Fireman out. The key was that Li Huaqing did not want the academics to take too many risks. Fireman's identity was extremely special. Once he regained his freedom, to some extent, the distance between the academics and the giant group would be narrowed again. The chaos in Eastern Europe was extremely delicate. Because of Li Tianlan, the entire giant group was on the edge of the cliff. At this time, the academics approached the giant group, and the risk was completely visible. If Li Huaqing supported Fireman, its significance was even more important than his support for Dongqing Wudi at the high-level meeting. After all, when voting, his vote was more like a symbolic meaning and did not play any role. However, with the full support of Fireman, the full support of the giant group, and Li Tianlan, the commander of the Snowdance Corps, this resolution was likely to be passed. The practical significance of this could be said to be very great. So Li Tianlan said that he asked the president to do his best. His words were very polite, but also very strong. Wait for my news. After a long time, Li Huaqing whispered, but even if Fireman comes out his position, just be the captain of my bodyguards. Li Tianlan said he won't mind. Li Huaqing nodded with a smile. The captain of the bodyguards was really not a specific job, but Li Tianlan's identity was there. The heir of the Li family. Fireman first assisted Li Honghe, then Li Guangtu, and now Li Tianlan. For the people of the Li family, this was absolutely a glory. What was there to mind? I'll arrange this. Li Huaqing seemed to think of something and made up his mind completely. Li Tianlan nodded. He looked at the time, got up, shook hands with Li Huaqing, and turned to leave. Li Huaqing personally sent him out and looked at his back as he walked towards the Audi thoughtfully. The military uniform was still the same one. It fit well. Now, it seemed that even the temperament was incomparably compatible. This young man, who was only 22 years old this year, seemed to be adapting to his role faster and faster. Li Huaqing was a little surprised by his terrifying adaptability. Li Zhonghu opened the door of the Audi for him. Li Tianlan sat in, rolled down the window, and waved to Li Huaqing. Li Huaqing also smiled and waved. The Audi left Jinqiu Pavilion and went farther and farther away. Li Tianlan quietly looked at the night of the Hidden Dragon Sea. Kunlun Pavilion, which represented Kunlun City, stood in the night, brightly lit. Li Tianlan looked at it calmly, his eyes firm. This was the first time he had asked President Li Huaqing for something as himself, and also as the heir of the Li family. It was a demand, not a request. He didn't tell Dongqing Wudi in advance, nor did he discuss it with others. Now he was the youngest marshal in the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State. Standing in this position, he instinctively wanted to do what he felt was right. He was not being pushed to do something. He wasn't going to do anything as a chess piece. Now he had a good hand in his hand, and he just wanted to try his best to play all the cards in this hand. Fireman was a crucial step, but it was only the first step. He was going to face the Wang family of Beihai. It was Kunlun City. It was the Prince Group. There were also many people with ulterior motives. So next, Sai City, Samsara Palace, and even the Purgatory of Heaven capital were all in his plan. In such a huge game of chess, it was far easier to be a chess piece than a chess player. But this was the position that should belong to Li Tianlan. There was nervousness, excitement, and apprehension in his heart. But most of all, it was the excitement and lofty sentiments aroused by the thick atmosphere of power in the Hidden Dragon Sea at night. His cell phone suddenly rang. Li Tianlan took out his cell phone, looked at the number, and answered it directly. Tonight was destined to be a sleepless night. After seeing Li Tianlan off, President Li Huaqing returned to Jinqiu Pavilion and made a pot of tea himself. He had told his secretary Han Yi to cancel all the reports tonight. When Secretary Wang of Wuxia province came, he could come in directly. The smell of tea wafted in the reception area of the office. Li Huaqing quietly played with the teapot at hand. His face was hidden in the rising mist, appearing blurry and deep. Today's two meetings were unexpected. It was an accident that Li Tianlan took the initiative to find him. It was also an accident that Wang Qinglei, the top leader of Wuxia, came to find him. As the president of Zhongzhou State, Li Huaqing communicated frequently with the leaders of various provinces. But this time he did not intend to communicate with Wang Qinglei. Wang Qinglei took the initiative to find him, and said that he wanted to report. Li Huaqing did not know what the other party wanted to say. Time passed slowly. There was a knock on the door outside the room. Li Huaqing took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, "Come in." The door was pushed open. Wang Qinglei, a member of the Zhongzhou State Decision-Making Committee and the top leader of Wuxia Province, walked in slowly and shook hands with Li Huaqing with a smile. "Comrade Qinglei, sit down." Li Huaqing smiled and pointed to the sofa, his voice steady and calm. Wang Qinglei sat down with a smile, whispering, "President, I heard that Li Tianlan came just now?" This was obviously not a report, but more like a chat. Li Huaqing was not surprised. He nodded and said with a smile, "He gave me a difficult problem." "Oh." Wang Qinglei's smile remained unchanged. "Fireman," Li Huaqing said. "Do you know this person? The one in the desert?" The sharpness in Wang Qinglei's eyes flashed away. He nodded and said, "I've heard of him. Tianlan wants me to get Fireman out. I support it. The case of more than 20 years ago is confusing. Specifically, Fireman's crime is not unforgivable. Tianlan now wants him to be a personal soldier by his side. In principle, I agree." Li Huaqing looked at Wang Qinglei with burning eyes and said, "Comrade Qinglei, what do you think?" Wang Qinglei was one of the leaders of the Southeast Group. When Li Tianlan was appointed as the commander of the Snowdance Corps, he voted in favor. But this did not mean that he and Wang Tianzong would really be of one mind. If the Wang family of Beihai were really united, there would be no such conversation now. "We made our position clear when we decided to restart the Snowdance Corps." Wang Qinglei pondered for a while and said with a chuckle, "The list of the Snowdance Corps was prepared by the commander. This is not empty talk. Since His Highness wants a personal soldier, if we don't agree, won't it seem that we are deliberately embarrassing him? At that time, Minister Dongqing will hit the table again." Li Huaqing laughed and nodded. "I think so too. Qinglei, on this matter, we have the same opinion." From Comrade Qinglei to Qinglei, it was just a change of address, but the atmosphere in the office had a subtle change. Wang Qinglei picked up the teacup, took a sip of tea, and said softly, "President, I came here this time mainly to report to you the situation of the overlapping posts of the supervisory and organizational departments in Wuxia. Both the supervisory and organizational departments are the top priorities. I hope to do a pilot in Wuxia. The specific documents will be submitted to you in a few days, and I hope to get your support." Li Huaqing said calmly, "I've heard of this. Qinglei, it's a big deal." "It's just an attempt." Wang Qinglei chuckled. "The cause of our party is getting better and better in useful attempts." Li Huaqing thought for a while, nodded and said thoughtfully, "But if this pilot is passed, I'm afraid it will be difficult to see results in a short time. It will take time." "Indeed." Wang Qinglei nodded and said meaningfully, "Wuxia needs time. I need time. President, don't you need time?" Li Huaqing's expression changed slightly, and he glanced at Wang Qinglei intentionally or unintentionally. Of course he needed time, and he needed time more than anyone else. His term of office still had more than 3 years. In these 3 years he must arrange a future for the academics. At present, it could be said that it was extremely difficult for him to achieve his goal. Time was of the essence for Li Huaqing. Qinglei's words seemed to mean something. Li Huaqing rubbed his hair with his palm and said calmly, "I'm telling the truth." Wang Qinglei smiled, looked at Li Huaqing and said softly, "Mr. President, we all need time. You give me the time I need, and I can naturally give you the time you need." He looked at Li Huaqing calmly, smiled, and asked a question that was almost fatally tempting to Li Huaqing. "Mr. President, do you want to be re-elected again?" Genius 1 second remember website. Mobile version M. Chapter 401. Li Tianlan came to Green Mountain as fast as he could. It was Dongqing Wudi who called him. Minister Fang Wenxi had submitted the list of the Snowdance Corps to the Army headquarters in Kunlun City. Dongqing Wudi held another meeting in the Army headquarters building. The Army of Zhongzhou State in Kunlun City passed the list, reported it to the office of the President and the Cabinet, and then conveyed it to the Decision-Making Committee, and then immediately issued a transfer order. In addition to informing Li Tianlan of the results of the meeting on the phone, Dongqing Wudi also told Li Tianlan a piece of unexpected news. Li Honghe arrived in Yuzhou and was now living in the Bai family's manor. The hidden dragon sea was not far from Green Mountain. In less than 40 minutes, Li Tianlan's Audi had reached Green Mountain and slowly drove into the Bai family's manor. Dongqing Rushi had arrived in Yuzhou from Huading and was waiting in front of the main villa. Seeing Li Tianlan get out of the car, she gently jumped down the steps and almost jumped into Li Tianlan's arms. Li Tianlan reached out to hold her and said, "Why are you so happy? I heard that you're a marshal." "Of course I'm happy," Dongqing Rushi said softly. Dongqing Rushi said softly. She was wearing a long red dress, and her black hair was dancing in the wind. The red dress set off her skin, which was extremely white and delicate. She looked pure and charming. "I'm going to Eastern Europe with you," Dongqing Rushi said and reached out to gently touch the military rank on Li Tianlan's shoulder. Her eyes were clear and serious. "It looks better than Dad's." Li Tianlan smiled. The military ranks of Zhongzhou State were the same as those of the Special Warfare System. Only the title of Marshal was slightly different. It was also an olive branch with 3 gold stars, but there was a delicate golden shield behind the gold star on the epaulet of the military marshal. The title of Marshal in the Special Warfare System was a golden sword in front of the gold star. "How's Huating?" Li Tianlan walked up the steps and asked casually. "It's fine." Dongqing Rushi thought for a moment. The maneuver these 2 days is also very interesting, but there are fewer people going to see it. Li Tianlan said, The final maneuver had a result on the first day. The result had already appeared, so the process was naturally not worth looking forward to. Although the final maneuver was still going on, it had now lost its original meaning. So the headmasters of the Sky Academy and the Deep Sea Academy were not in Huading at this time. Instead, they came to Tongming Temple in the West Mountain of Yuzhou to train the officers of the Snowdance Corps. Dongqing Rushi naturally put her small hand in Li Tianlan's. The two entered the villa. In the living room, Li Honghe and Bai Zhanfang were playing chess. Neither of them had any desire to win or lose. Their moves were casual, and many times, in the eyes of an outsider, their moves were meaningless. Dongqing Wudi sat aside and looked at the chessboard in boredom. When he saw Li Tianlan and Dongqing Rushi coming in, he smiled and waved at them. Li Tianlan came over and called him Grandpa. He glanced at Bai Zhanfang. Before he could speak, Li Honghe said without looking up, "Zhanfang is my old friend for many years, just like cold light. You should call him Grandpa too." Li Tianlan paused for a moment, then calmly called him Grandpa with a smile. Bai Zhanfang looked up at him with a smile, patted the sofa beside him and said, "Sit down." Li Tianlan nodded and took Dongqing Rushi to sit next to Dongqing Wudi. "Xishan is quite far from here. How did we get here so quickly?" Dongqing Wudi looked at the chessboard and laughed casually. "I had a talk with the president before I came out of the Hidden Dragon Sea. It's not far from here." Li Tianlan said quietly. In his sight, Bai Zhanfang seemed to be dim-sighted because of old age. A cannon shot hit one of Li Honghe's pawns through Li Honghe's chess pieces. Li Honghe didn't say it out loud, but the other pawn moved forward 2 squares at a time without batting an eyelid. The corner of Li Tianlan's mouth twitched. "Hidden Dragon Sea?" Dongqing Wudi raised his eyebrows. Li Honghe and Bai Zhanfang also turned their eyes to Li Tianlan. "Well, the Snowdance Corps was established, and I also found a powerful bodyguard. But the identity of the best candidate in my mind is a little special, so I specially talked to the president." Li Tianlan said. Li Honghe calmly messed up the chessboard, which was already at a disadvantage. He narrowed his eyes and said with a smile, "Who is the best candidate in your mind?" "Of course it's Master Hua." Li Tianlan laughed and said, "No one is more suitable than him." Li Honghe's eyes relaxed. He nodded and sighed. "I came here to talk to you about this. Jihu was implicated by the Li family back then. Otherwise, with his talent, he should have entered the invincible realm long ago. After so many years, there has been no chance before. Now that there is a chance, I have to get him out of the desert." Jihu was the name of fireman. His surname was Wu. It was obviously a very familiar name not only for the Li family, but also for the Dongqing clan. Dongqing Wudi was stunned and whispered, "He is really a good candidate, but his age? Age is not a problem." Li Tianlan whispered, "With fire. In my current state, no one in the Snowdance Corps is his opponent except me." Fireman's realm was in the fire-flaming realm. But like Tribulation 3 years ago, he broke one limit after another in the fire-flaming realm, and finally stepped into a different path. In fact, it was impossible to tell whether such a person was still in the fire-flaming realm or not. But one thing Li Tianlan could be sure of was that when he fought with Fireman in the desert prison to verify his strength, Fireman did not really use his full strength. What he exerted was the real strength of the fulfillment of the fire-flaming realm, not the strength after he broke through the limit of the fire-flaming realm. In that state, Fireman still forced Li Tianlan to break through into the thundershocking realm, so that he had the first time to recultivate martial arts. How strong was a fireman who could exert his full strength? In Li Tianlan's view, in this state, even if Fireman had no hope of entering the invincible realm in this life, and his state would decline with age, the strength he could exert would hardly be worse than that of Tribulation 3 years ago. Such a person was not only an absolute expert in the 4 realms of martial arts, but also could play a very important role in the battlefield of the invincible realm. What did the president say? Li Honghe asked aloud. He agreed. Li Tianlan's tone was calm. The atmosphere in the living room froze for a moment. Li Honghe, Bai Zhanfang, and Dongqing Wudi looked at each other. Li Honghe's eyes relaxed slightly. Bai Zhanfang's eyes were full of smiles. Dongqing Wudi's eyes were full of relief. Without any of them knowing, Li Tianlan went to the Hidden Dragon Sea. This matter could be said to be very small, but it could also be said to be very important. Such a Li Tianlan was what they wanted to see. The Li family, the Dongqing clan, the Bai family, and even the entire giant group put their future on Li Tianlan. Under the great responsibility, each of them was eager to see Li Tianlan's future. Not only his martial arts, but also his ability to deal with things. It was hard to say how Li Tianlan's ability was now, but at least today, he let everyone see his autonomy. It had only been a few days since he became the marshal of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State. But he had been actively adapting to the change of his identity. Today he went to the Hidden Dragon Sea not as a young man, but as a marshal of Zhongzhou State. The fact that he could adapt to his identity in a short time sounded simple, but how could it be so easy? Li Tianlan was also not used to it now. But he was trying very hard to adapt to his new identity and status, and was doing the behavior that was in line with his identity and status. He was the future core of the giant group, the future of the giant group. And the future leader that the giant group wanted should have his own ideas, his own plans, his own thoughts, his own actions, and his own schemes. Tonight was just the first step for Li Tianlan. And it was a perfect first step. Li Huaqing agreed to Li Tianlan's request, which also showed that Li Huaqing recognized Li Tianlan's current identity and behavior. Very good, the president is still very supportive of the Snowdance Corps. Tianlan, if you need anything in the future, you should communicate with the president in time. As an ally, he always has to bear some of his own obligations. Dongqing Wudi chuckled, took out a cigarette, and handed it to Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan nodded, took the cigarette, and lit it. What are you talking about? A soft voice suddenly sounded. In the sound of soft footsteps, Bai Qingqian came over with a plate of fruit and put it on the tea table. Mom. Dongqing Rushi stood up and called her in a crisp voice. Bai Qingqian smiled and touched Dongqing Rushi's head, but she looked at Li Tianlan. Although she was at home, this extraordinary woman, who was very famous in the political circle of Zhongzhou State, was also dressed in formal clothes. She was charming, and her whole body was full of an indescribable grace and elegance. Li Tianlan stood up subconsciously. He who was calm just now, instinctively reached out and scratched his head, looking a little silly. Dongqing Rushi laughed out loud. But except for her, everyone, including Li Honghe, had a complicated look in their eyes. Eat more fruit and smoke less. It's bad for your health. Bai Qingqian looked at Li Tianlan, and her voice was soft and gentle. Li Tianlan said yes, but he didn't know what to say. This was the second time he saw Bai Qingqian. But just like the first time he saw her, It was hard for Li Tianlan to describe his feelings. His perception, which was almost close to the peak of the invincible realm, was completely confused under her eyes. This feeling was not panic, but an instinctive but somewhat inexplicable feeling of wanting to be close to her. This feeling might come from her eyes, or it might be something else. Li Tianlan couldn't tell. He just felt that this feeling was very strange, so it made him very uncomfortable. This military uniform suits you very well, Bai Qingqian said softly. She was very close to Dongqing Rushi, and Dongqing Rushi was very close to Li Tianlan, so he couldn't help but feel natural. Bai Qingqian raised her hand and touched Li Tianlan's head. She said softly, "How do you feel now that you're a marshal? Are you tired?" Li Tianlan's body was completely stiff. Bai Qingqian's hand was very gentle, but Li Tianlan's body was as stiff as a stone. "I'm fine." His voice seemed to be a little frozen, so it sounded a little strange. Bai Qingqian's eyes shook violently. She took a step forward subconsciously, and then she seemed to realize something, so she put down her palm. "Don't be too stressed." She smiled and seemed to want to say something, but when the words were on the tip of her tongue, she said, "You guys talk first." It seemed that there were thousands of words that she didn't know where to start. Finally, they were all hidden in her eyes. Bai Qingqian gently turned and went upstairs. Li Tianlan sat down again. Bai Qingqian stood in front of the railing on the second floor and stared at the hall. Li Tianlan, who had already sat down, raised his head subconsciously. The two of them looked at each other for a moment, and Bai Qingqian had already turned and entered the room. She wore a formal suit at home, because she was about to leave and return to Guangdong. On the first day Li Tianlan came to Yuzhou, she had already put down a lot of official business in Guangdong, and returned to Yuzhou. She wanted to see Li Tianlan, but she didn't want to disturb him. Until now. She waited for Li Tianlan's arrival, but she just took a look at him. Just to take a look at him. Compared to the thousands of kilometers she would have to travel back, this look was too short. The living room returned to silence again. Dongqing Rushi cut a piece of orange for Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan took it and ate it. The orange was very sweet. Dongqing Rushi reached out to take the apple again. "Let's go to the study," Bai Zhanfang suddenly said, breaking the weird silence in the living room. Dongqing Wudi patted Li Tianlan on the shoulder, stood up, and looked at Li Honghe. Li Honghe had been staying in Yuzhou in recent days. Now that the list of the Snowdance Corps was officially determined, Bai Zhanfang and Dongqing Wudi certainly had to discuss the action in Eastern Europe with Li Honghe. The Li family had collapsed for many years, but Li Honghe still had a backup plan. In this situation, it was time for Li Honghe to show some of his backup plans. Even if he had said that he would not be the protagonist in the chaos in Eastern Europe, even if he was not the protagonist, he would play a very important role. "Let's go." Li Honghe stood up. A cell phone suddenly rang. It was not a phone call, but a text message. Li Honghe frowned, took out his cell phone and glanced at it. His body suddenly stiffened for a moment, and a pair of turbid eyes quietly looked at the cell phone screen. "Senior Li?" Dongqing Wudi shouted with some confusion. Li Honghe did not respond. After a long time, he slowly put away the cell phone in his hand and looked at Li Tianlan, Dongqing Wudi, and Bai Zhanfang. He suddenly laughed. "I can't go to the study with you." He smiled softly, but his tone became calm, firm, and irresistible. "I want to go back to Linen. Right away. Wudi, arrange a private plane." "What's the matter?" Li Tianlan asked with a frown. "It's okay." Li Honghe looked at his grandson with soft eyes. "It's a good thing. I just suddenly remembered that my existence is still very meaningful." His existence was meaningful. But Li Honghe also knew that it was meaningless for him to be here. Li Honghe did leave a lot of things in Zhongzhou State. These things could still play an important role today. But before he used those chess pieces, the woman named Qin Weibai directly overturned the chessboard in his hand. So the chess pieces in his hand began to overlap with the chess pieces in her hand. In such a situation, Li Honghe could still play a role. But his role was no longer crucial. For him, an unimportant role was equivalent to no role. If it was not useful, It was meaningless. It was not until he received this text message that he realized that even if Qin Weibai controlled most of the chess pieces he had prepared, there were still some things that she could not control at all. Ironically, until today, Li Honghe did not know if he could control these things. But he would do his best. So he wanted to go back. Go back right away. Genius 1 second to remember the address of this website. Mobile version. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.